All right, folks, good to see all of you on a Saturday night, week 2 of college football. Tell me if you've ever heard this one before. Alabama struggles against South Florida. Let me know if you've ever heard these before. NC State's not ready for prime time. Notre Dame may not be ready for prime time or even the small time. Prime time himself not ready for prime time. A lot of storylines in college football on this fine Saturday in September. Appreciate you all stopping by. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. Super chats available for all of you to contribute. But the most effective way is down on the ticker right there. Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App. So we would encourage you to help us build the channel and continue what we do here at the Voice of College Football because we enjoy this. We hope you do as well. So we want to continue to talk college football with all of you every day, 365. All right, let's get to the scores that are currently in progress. Then we'll get to the night games and we will take your calls, of course. I know that Oregon and Boise State have obviously, they have kicked off, as others have. And the current scoreboard looks something like this. Who saw this coming? Clemson has exploded on App State. And we know what the deal is going to be, that anything that happens here in week 2, it's going to be like, well, you're just beating teams that have lost to other teams. So none of those teams, who don't have any teams yet that have lost a game that have proven that they can beat somebody else decent. That has yet to take place. So until LSU goes out and beats somebody decent, or Texas A&M, or Michigan, or somebody like that, Clemson goes out and beats somebody decent, well, we don't know how good they are. All right, but Clemson has exploded, and that's pretty impressive. Cade Klubnik, 378 yards passing, 5 touchdowns. Phil Maffa, 118 yards rushing. And so Clemson found an offense. And so unless App State is the worst App State team that they have fielded in more than a decade, this is actually pretty significant that Clemson was at least able to do this because nobody else does this to App State. We went over this game with our buddy Steve Merrill from Wager Talk, and I went through all the scores of App State against power competition in the last 6 or 7 years, and they have competed. Generally been one-score games or wins for App State. So Clemson with a big win against App State. Does it prove a ton? No, not yet. But it's still better than them going out as a 17-point favorite and winning by 8 or 9 or 10, as many expected. UTEP leads Southern Utah 17-14, fourth quarter. All right, look at this. We are nearing halftime at Autzen Stadium. This score looks familiar because Oregon just led Idaho one week ago in the fourth quarter, 17-14. And right now, Boise State leads Oregon. How about that? 17-14. We will, of course, keep an eye on that. First and foremost, Arizona trails Northern Arizona at half, 10-6. That's a top 25 team. See how much the rankings mean? Washington State leads Texas Tech 21-3. Fresno State on top of Sacramento State, 25-10, nearing the half. New Mexico State, 17, Liberty 6. They are nearing halftime. Arizona State, Mississippi State, Big 12 against the SEC, 10-3, Sun Devils. Oregon State leads San Diego State 7-0. USC on top of Utah State, 10-0. They're still in the first quarter. And there we've got some top 25 games. The only ones at night would have been Ohio State beat Western Michigan 56-0. I mentioned the Bama struggle against South Florida. The final score does not indicate, but this was a 14-13 game in the fourth quarter. There's your stunner of the day. Northern Illinois goes to Notre Dame, upsets the Irish 16-14. Marcus Freeman now has the dubious distinction of having lost to Stanford, not a good Stanford team, a lousy Stanford team, Marshall, and Northern Illinois. So while Brian Kelly is despised by most Notre Dame fans and Marcus Freeman's supposed to be this enormous upgrade, I don't know. And then we're going to skip the daytime scores. This was a big one right here. So Tennessee, we know that North Carolina State, I think this gives us indication that they're a fraud, most likely 51-10. Nobody loses 51-10 if they are truly any kind of contender. But in the ACC, I think everyone's a contender. So this is a validation of Tennessee, but North Carolina State, most likely those warning signs against Western Carolina, yes, they were valid. Oklahoma survived Houston 16-12. I caught much of the fourth quarter of this game, and Oklahoma was awful on offense, as the final score would indicate. That Arkansas-Oklahoma State game was excellent. But let's see elsewhere tonight. Yeah, Illinois, a bit of an underdog at home, beat Kansas. A lot of people surprised by that score. Not me, not surprised. I thought it was a coin flip. Illinois, again, wins at home 23-17. I did pick Kansas to win the game, but certainly not surprised in any such way of that final score. And that's pretty much it, I believe, for the nighttime scores. We'll go through the rest of college football and some of the surprises that came through. If we just look at those three, just take those three games right there that I just randomly stopped on. Those were all basically double-digit upsets. Cal, a 2-touchdown underdog at Auburn, wins on the Plains. So it's supposed to be such a difficult place to play at Auburn. That's what we hear all the time. Just one of the horrifying places to play. In this Pac-12 team, I know they're in the ACC, this Pac-12 school that never plays in front of anyone is just going to be so intimidated to play at Auburn. Yeah, the performance on the field was not indicative of that final score. Cal was the much better football team. South Carolina, Kentucky a 10-point favorite. They lose 31-6. I have no idea what happened there. Michigan State, Maryland, another one that I think was a foregone conclusion because we've gotten into this mode of thinking, well, Maryland's a decent team. They beat everyone in the Big Ten except for the upper echelon, and they've kind of settled into this 8-5 kind of program, and Michigan State's just terrible. They barely beat FAU, and boom, it's at Maryland. All these road games, too. Cal at Auburn, South Carolina at Kentucky, Michigan State at Maryland as double-digit underdogs. So we will leave it right there, and we will take your calls. And maybe appropriately so, we take one from DeReal MVP.
Hey, Mark, how you doing this evening?
I am doing probably a little bit better than you are.
I'm doing fine. Once I knew the game was over, it's easy for me to let it go because I have realistic expectations about my team. If we're going to go 7-5, Mark, you got to lose 5 games somewhere. So, not ideal.
Well, looks like you're staring at number 2 next week.
Yeah, we're going to lose that game probably 50-6 by 60. But Mark, we play Florida, Vanderbilt, Ohio, Murray State. So those are all games that we should still win. Those are all really bad teams. Kentucky's probably a really bad team as well, but all of those teams have shown that they're terrible, so that could get us to 6 right or 5-7 right there at worst case scenario. So well, Brock Vandagriff, Mark, is just an inexperienced quarterback. Mark, he did something I didn't think was possible. Instead of throwing it in double coverage, he threw it in triple coverage, which doesn't work out, Mark. Throwing in triple coverage does not work out. Did you know that?
Usually doesn't work out. I have seen it done before, though. So he's not the first, but that's not advisable.
Yeah, and we also need an offensive line in the state of Kentucky. It's currently missing. South Carolina was able to put pressure with 3 people rushing the quarterback consistently, Mark. Completely missing. So if anybody can find them, the University of Kentucky, I'm sure, would appreciate having one.
Yeah. It's my understanding that the Big Blue Wall was going to be back this year.
Well, it got disintegrated. A sledgehammer, I think, hit the metaphorical wall and it came crumbling down, Imagine how much Texas dominated Michigan on the offensive and defensive line and just replace Texas with South Carolina and Michigan with Kentucky. And that's basically what happened. So
The only difference is you did not get embarrassed in front of the nation. I know
Hmm.
that the game was technically in front of the nation, but a few less people watched it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked about that, Mark, but I was stunned by watching the Texas Michigan game, not because of Texas winning even by double digits, but just the thorough domination of Texas throughout the game. I mean, at no point did Michigan look like the better team. And I thought they would be able to put up a fight for a half or three quarters and Texas would pull away late. But Davis Warren's not the answer, Mark. And Alex Orji apparently doesn't know how to throw a football because every time he's in the game, he just runs. So I guess his arm doesn't know how to throw. So
Yeah, Michigan apparently hasn't come to some conclusions. Number one, that if you have a quarterback, and by definition, much of their responsibility is actually throwing the ball downfield, but you've got one of those guys that fills that position, walks out onto the field, but you refuse to throw the ball when he's in the game, that makes it somewhat simpler for the defense to actually defend the play. And we saw that time and time again, where Michigan just thought that they could just magically put in Alex Orji and just snap the ball to him, and he was going to run for a first down when it was 3rd and 3, 3rd and 5, and it continued to fail.
would you say it was a significant advantage Texas had that they had a realistic idea of what Michigan was going to do when Alex Orji was out there?
Yeah, there's just no threat. Or
I got you.
Michigan,
So what
it
if
was my
we?
suggestion. It was my suggestion last week when asked by Steve Dace, Michigan podcast, that they work on, well, this should have been worked on for months and months and months, going back to the end of last season, like 3 passes that he can throw, like work on 3 passes that he can reasonably throw, maybe a quick slant, few different passes, and then those become the passes that he can threaten a defense with out of that formation, and you could actually trick the defense and be relatively confident that he can pull it off.
Correct, Mark. I completely agree with you. But, Mark, the only reason I was mainly bringing up that was because I feel like if Texas had the advantage of knowing what Michigan was going to do during those plays, maybe, just maybe, Mark, Connor Stallions impacted what Michigan did for those 3 years. I mean, I'm not going to say it impacted or it didn't impact it, but, Mark, I mean, we have a lot of circumstantial evidence and it keeps building. Michigan was terrible relatively compared to what they were before 2021. They were great 21, 22, 23. And now they look like 7-5, 6-6, and 24, Mark. Circumstantial evidence just keeps piling up against Michigan.
I can't debate that. I cannot debate that in any such way. Connor Stallions showed up and Michigan started winning.
He should be the MVP for their team. But another game, Mark, I saw. Did you see the Oklahoma game? They won on a safety, basically, which is cool. I mean, I haven't seen that. I never thought Oklahoma would win on a safety.
Yeah, I saw the safety, and I saw how pathetic that game was. It just seemed like it was, and I just checked in the 4th quarter that it was just kind of running in slow motion. And every time that Jackson Arnold went back to pass, it looked like he was utterly just kind of confused on where to throw the ball. And when a quarterback throws the ball downfield and he just kind of throws it at the sideline and his receiver's running down the sideline, but he really has no shot at catching the ball. I just saw that repeatedly happening. And so maybe I shouldn't be blaming him. Maybe the receivers can't get separation, but I didn't know that Houston had such a formidable defense. I didn't know that we were seeing the resurgence of the 2021 Georgia Bulldogs on defense in Houston.
I didn't either, but apparently that's the case, Mark. Another place where Georgia was allegedly at was at Notre Dame today. Eastern Illinois kind of dominated. It didn't look like it, but Eastern Illinois looked like the better team throughout that game. Riley Leonard looked horrendous in that game. Did you watch any of that game?
I saw just the final drive. I just watched Northern Illinois drive it down the field and kick the game-winning field goal, in which that even confirmed even more so to me that Notre Dame is, they fooled me and others to a certain extent last week, because even playing that horrific of a game, if you've got a defense that's supposed to be as good as Notre Dame and you've got a full field to, it's not like their offense turned the ball over at the 15-yard line and they had no shot. They allowed Northern Illinois to drive the football down the field with the game on the line, protecting a lead, and their defense could not stop Northern Illinois. So it was a pathetic performance. Not that I got to see it, but I saw enough of it that was pretty obvious.
Well, something else that was bothersome was about, I would say, 6 to 5 minutes in the game. It was 2nd and 1 around the 50-yard line for Notre Dame. They had the ball. Riley Leonard threw a bomb like 20, 30 yards, but he underthrew it by like 5 or 10 yards, and a Northern Illinois defender picked it off and ran it all the way back to the 50 to set up that drive. Just a horrendous throw.
I did see that. Yep, I did see that. The defender actually like stood there and, I'm exaggerating, but he basically stood there like it was a fair catch and caught it like a, basket catch in his stomach. Yeah.
Right. I want to ask you about, so it was 3rd and 2 with about 40 seconds left to go. Northern Illinois does a run play. It looked like to me Northern Illinois got the first down. They made it to the 18-yard line. Yes. I don't understand what that ref saw. To me, he spotted a full yard and a half.
Yes. I have no idea what he saw. And then they replayed it, and I have no idea. Now that is the 3rd time, I believe. This happened twice last week. One was in the Penn State-West Virginia game where Penn State stopped West Virginia. Like, they actually threw the guy backward. Like, he lost yardage on a 4th and 1 play, and they gave him the first down. And then there was some other game where I could not believe how bad the spot was. But that as well, I just thought, okay, he went into this pile. He had offensive linemen in front of him. They just thrust him forward, and he clearly didn't hit the ground. And yeah, that was dead. It was a horrible spot. And the official actually even had the main yard line to the stripe going all the way across the field at the 20-yard line to guide him, even as a barometer that you could clearly see that he passed the 20-yard line. And the official came out and marked him at like the 20.5-yard line.
And something else about that play, Mark, was after they reviewed the play, they stopped the clock. It was a run play. They didn't get the first down.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame was able to keep a timeout. Now, because they're Notre Dame, they still ended up choking it. But, I mean, people talked about how refs rig games and stuff like that. In my opinion, those officials need to be demoted heavily for that end of game situation, especially with the way betting is now in society. I mean, that to me is unacceptable.
Sure, it is unacceptable now that they've got the they certainly have the cushion of the replay, so it's unacceptable that they can't get that correct. But it's almost like trying to find good teams in college football now. Trying to find good officiating crews is becoming more difficult. I just started to work on my rankings, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, who's not looked bad this year? Like everybody, of course, there's a row of 2-0 teams. There's a ton of 2-0 teams, but Penn State, they looked awful today. They are kind of the microcosm of where college football is. There's this row of good teams where either they've lost already, LSU, Texas A&M, Notre Dame, etc., Florida State, or they looked lousy in one of these games. We can only go about 5 or 6 teams deep and say, okay, these teams look the part. They look like they're legitimate playoff teams.
Right, but yet we're expanding it to 12. To me, there's only 3 teams now who can win the national championship.
Okay,
it's Georgia,
those are
Ohio State, Texas. That's it. Everybody else right now, to me, is completely eliminated. Everybody else, I don't believe can win good enough to win 4 consecutive games against high quality teams.
I'm going to throw some teams at you. First one comes to mind is Alabama.
Did you see them play against USF? I don't believe in their downfield passing game with Jalen Milroe. I think if they play Georgia and Ohio State in back-to-back weeks, I just think those defenses are going to wear them down.
Sure. They also struggled last year against USF without Jalen Milroe on the field, but it was still the rest of the team that eventually came within centimeters of beating Michigan and probably beating Washington to win the national championship. So I'm just saying, I'm not ready to give up on Alabama. I'm not ready to give up on Oregon, although even going into the season, before the Idaho struggle, before the struggle against, apparently it's continuing against Boise State, I still wasn't sold on Oregon. I'm sold on them as a regular season team. I'm not sold on them, making a 3 or 4 game run in the playoff, with 2 of those teams being really good.
Right. And then Alabama, to me, is the only arguable team, because after that, you got Ole Miss, Penn State, and those teams, to me, aren't good enough to compete with an Ohio State, a Texas, a Georgia. I mean, they're
and think about how thin your list is, but it's valid. I'm not arguing with you, because after Ohio State hasn't proven anything, but we know who they are, and we'll be surprised if they're not one of the best teams in the country. Okay, Texas went and did what they did, and of course, Michigan is not the team that they've been the last 3 years. It doesn't appear so, but Texas still just. What was concerning about Michigan, if you're a Michigan fan and you believe that you have an elite defense, which I thought that as well, I thought that the game was going to go something similar to what you just presented. Like, Michigan hangs in the game because the defense is so strong. They're able to run the ball a little bit, hang in the game. They got the heart of a champion. They're only going to be down 1 score in the 4th quarter, and then maybe the defense caves in. And so if you would have shown me 31-12 yesterday, I would have said, okay, maybe it was 17-12 in the 4th quarter, and Michigan's defense finally got wore out and caved in. But from the opening drive, Texas was just up and down the field with no issue.
Right, and to me, more concerning was Michigan's 3rd down defense at the beginning of the game. I mean, it was atrocious. And their running backs, Texas's running back, if they just put him in the flat every single time he was open, he would just run like 20, 30 yards. I mean, it was shocking. I think ESPN said Texas gained 373 yards in the first 3 quarters, Mark. Do you think Michigan, against anybody, gave up 373 yards last year?
Yeah, that's bad.
I just don't think they're near a good football. I mean, they're good. Like, they're 7-5, 6-6, 8-4 level good. But it wouldn't shock me as of now if they got wiped out by USC in a few weeks. If they lost 14 to 21 points to them, it wouldn't shock me. I think their offense is just as good as Texas. Now, their defense is probably worse than them, but I don't believe in Davis Warren or Alex Orji to be able to move the football. I mean, my goodness, Mark, did you see Colston Loveland? I mean, he's supposedly one of the best tight ends, 1st-round pick. He just completely dropped the ball with like a minute to go before halftime. He literally just dropped the ball.
Yes. I think when I watched it on the replay, what actually happened was he caught the football, and I don't know if he was intending on just running with the football with one hand or if he was in the process of tucking it away, but he basically punched it out with his other hand. That's pretty bad when your best offensive player is just fumbling the ball away against air. Again, getting back to your original point, and I know I got us stuck on Texas and Michigan. Yes, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Alabama on the perimeter. And then you start to grab any other team, and it's like, are there any good teams in this country? Maybe Tennessee could possibly have an opportunity to prove themselves, but they would be the next ones. Tennessee, USC, I guess Utah, although they're not going to play anybody with a pulse the entire season to show anything. It's really an odd season already in terms of, if you were going to give me the field against Ohio State, Georgia, and Texas, I'd say no, thank you.
Right. And Mark, does the Big 12 even exist as a conference this year with how poorly they're struggling? I mean, today was probably one of the worst days a Power 4 conference has had in a while. They just took loss after loss after loss after loss.
Well, Iowa State didn't.
Yes, that's true.
That's their big win of the season, and that's probably going to be it. So so we got the Kansas loss against Illinois. So we were talking Big 12 the other day, and we had some Big 12 people in the chat whom I appreciate and certainly want to be here all the time, but we tell the truth and tell it like it is. And they were letting me know that Oklahoma State had this phenomenal performance last week against South Dakota because they had a better performance than what the spread indicated. And I said, well, that's because Vegas doesn't value Oklahoma State as a team for them to only be like an 8-point favorite against an FCS team. So just because they outplayed the spread, do you really think that a similar team in the Big Ten or the SEC would only be an 8-point favorite against South Dakota? No, that's similar to Kansas went to Illinois. Until further notice, until proven otherwise, Illinois is going to be one of the 3 or 4 or 5 worst teams in the Big Ten, and Kansas was supposed to be this, well, they were ranked. And of course, they lose to Illinois. So, yeah, the Big 12, again, Iowa State's carrying the conference right now in terms of out-of-conference wins. And for anybody that watched the Arkansas-Oklahoma State game, yes, Oklahoma State gets credit for the win. Good for you. You're playing one of the worst teams in the SEC. And Arkansas dominated that game. I watched that game. I wanted to watch that game. Arkansas almost had 700 yards of total offense. They completely dominated the first 3 quarters of that game. It should have been like 35-0.
Yeah, Mark, but bad teams find a way to lose.
Yeah, and that's what happened with those 2 teams because, I kind of felt bad for Arkansas. Sam Pittman seems like a decent guy, and I would like to see them have a good season because they look basically doomed. And Taylon Green at one point in that game, Arkansas is up 21. They were up 21-0. No, they were up 14-0, I guess. Anyway, they throw a ball to the end zone. Taylon Green was running around the field, dodging guys, made this remarkable throw to the end zone, and the dude drops it. And then the next play, Taylon Green throws a pick 6, puts Oklahoma State right back in the game. But Oklahoma State, Arkansas ran the ball at will. They held Ollie Gordon, who's supposed to be the best back in the nation, according to a lot of people, to 47 yards on 20 carries. Yeah, so the SEC loses a game there, but let's consider the seedings.
Right, and then you had some other Big 12 losses. Colorado got absolutely hammered.
Oh, yes. That game was over quick.
Yeah, I was surprised. Nebraska's defense is very impressive to me.
Yeah, they just ran right over them. They were physically just crushing them on both sides of the ball, just running down their throats at will. That was another score that was not indicative of how much Nebraska was crushing them and just kind of put it on cruise control.
Right. And now the final take, Mark, I want to flirt with early in the season is with how the top 2 teams in the SEC looks, Texas and Georgia, and they play one another. And with how the Big Ten looks like it's Ohio State, and then a gap to USC, and then another gap. Do you think it's possible if Texas were to lose 2 very close games to Georgia, and Georgia went undefeated, Texas would get the 5 seed?
Oh, sure. Sure it is. Absolutely.
I hope so, because I don't know if like USC's 11-1. Do they play Ohio State this year?
No, unfortunately, no.
Okay, so let's say they meet up in the championship game and Ohio State controls the game. I'm not convinced that the committee's going to do the right thing and put the Texas team above them. I think the committee's going to look at the 11-1 record and say, well, 11-1 is better than 10-2, therefore USC is going to be the 5 seed.
Well, considering it's those teams with those brand names and those 2 conferences, you might be right.
Right, and it's frustrating to me because that 5 seed, because of the way this playoff structure is so valuable, Mark. It's just so valuable. And to me, it's unfair that the SEC has got 2 of the 3 clearly best teams of the country, and that they're going to kind of get screwed out of one of the better seeds because of the playoff format or because of the lack of competition in the other conference.
And they might have 3 of the top 4.
Who would the fourth? Tennessee or Ole Miss?
Or Alabama or Ole Miss or Tennessee. They might have 6 of the top 7. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe, Mark. You're telling me this could be even a better SEC year than that 2022 year, a few years ago.
I'm basically looking at a situation, and it's, I don't want to overreact. I'm not that type. I don't do it. But the way teams are playing right now, look at the screen. Oregon is losing to Boise State in the third quarter at home after they just struggled past Idaho. And again, I was not a big believer in Oregon being a true national championship contender. I think they're a good team. They got talent, all that business. They're a top 10 team. But we know how much that cliff drops off typically in most years between, the top 3 or 4, if that. So if Ohio State does not come through for the Big Ten, we can expect an SEC championship game.
Well, Mark, you were getting my hopes up more than that. I was expecting an all-4 Final Four. That's what I really want. It's just you have Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, Alabama.
Somebody takes out Ohio State.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this Oregon game is why I don't believe they're able to win the national championship. I cannot see in any universe Kirby Smart, for example, having his team this unprepared. Like, I believe Oregon is by far the more talented team. But could you see in any universe where Georgia goes out there and it's down 20-14 in the third quarter against this level team?
No.
Exactly.
No, I don't. And I don't put Ohio State on Georgia's level in regards to what's been accomplished in the last 4 or 5 years by these 2 coaching staffs, because I just think Georgia's airtight. Ohio State's there from a talent perspective, but I don't see Ohio State messing around with a team like Boise State because there's no evidence of it. They're another one of the teams, and there are very few, maybe just 2 or 3. And when Clemson was in their run of dominance, that you can basically say they never mess around with teams in the G5 or the lower half of the power structure. They just don't mess around with those teams. They obliterate them. Ohio State played a team today that had a lead in the fourth quarter at Wisconsin, and they beat them 56-0. They just don't mess around with those teams.
Right. That's what separates the elite teams from everyone else. And Mark, the final thing I'll say is I saw a few overreactions on your Michigan channel. John's co-host, I forget the name of him, but he's already suggesting Sharon Moore needs to hit the can. And,
wow.
Find his way out of Ann Arbor, Mark. It's only been 2 games, but he needs to go. Another one's Marcus Freeman, Mark. Coaches, any chance either of those coaches get going before the end of the year?
Marcus Freeman's not going anywhere. I would be shocked there. Now, Sharon Moore, well, look at his contract status. Let's understand that he has not signed a contract. I don't remember the terminology, but it was brought up to me last night during the show, and we looked it up, and he's under the same conditions that Jim Harbaugh was after his contract ran out. They refused to sign him to a next contract, and he was kind of floating going into the 2021 season until he proved himself again. And Sharon Moore's under the same conditions since I forget the term again. They've signed him to some kind of I would have to look it up, but he does not have a contract per se.
But Mark, he looked so great last year. I mean, he beat Penn State. He beat somebody else that was irrelevant, I think Maryland, and then Ohio State. Do you think, anyway, there was a sign or 2 given to him that may have increased his value?
I am looking up the contract situation with Sharon Moore.
Yeah, it's odd. I mean, the University of Michigan has done a bunch of odd things recently, so this doesn't really surprise me. But it's kind of weird to have a head coach that's not signed to a contract.
Yeah, so this was not the article I wanted to go to, but anyway, yeah, he doesn't have a contract, but they have a understanding. Obviously, he shows up to work and he does his job and he gets paid a lot of money.
Right. Also, the final thing I'll say, Mark, is after the Eastern Illinois win, did you see him cry on the field? I mean, to me, that's an acceptable response to beating Notre Dame, a top 5 team. Why would you cry on the field if you're Michigan beating Penn State, Mark? Those two games don't seem similar. What do you think?
Wait, who else did this?
Eastern Illinois' coach after the game beating Notre Dame, he cried on the field.
Northern Illinois.
Northern, whatever. I mean, Mark, they're an irrelevant team either way.
Sure. I do like to get the school correct. But yeah, he was crying on the field after the game. I did not see that, but I wouldn't be surprised. This is the first time that a MAC school has ever defeated a top 5 team in the nation.
I mean, that to me just says the MAC is better than Notre Dame this year. Maybe Notre Dame needs conference realignment to the MAC.
Notre Dame has dodged some bullets against the MAC recently. They almost lost to Ball State. They should have lost that game, and there was another game here in the last 2 or 3 years that they could have lost to the MAC. And of course, they've got now. And I find this interesting because I tend, and I don't want my feelings to get in the way that Marcus Freeman just comes across as a more likable human being than Brian Kelly. I don't know the two gentlemen. Brian Kelly may be a saint and Marcus Freeman may be just the opposite, but they just come across in that way to me and most people, I think. But in regards to when you talk to Notre Dame fans, they just talk about Brian Kelly like he was an idiot. He didn't do anything here. He wasn't, we were just happy to get rid of him. But Brian Kelly wasn't losing to Northern Illinois and Marshall and 3-9 Stanford teams.
Well, don't worry. They've already got a response to that. I watched Always Irish. By the way, have them on here just to do a wellness check. I think that'd get tons of views because, Notre Dame, anytime somebody loses, the views go up exponentially. But he claims Notre Dame would still be 1-1 because Notre Dame would have lost to Texas A&M but barely beat Northern Illinois, Mark. That's their running theory if they had Brian Kelly. So the outcome is the same. It's just the way they got there is different.
So Brian Kelly has proven that he can't beat Texas A&M while he's at LSU, even though they did by 3 scores last year.
Right. I don't think Texas A&M's this massive win they're making it out to be. I mean, congrats. You beat an 8-4, 7-5 football team, Mark. I mean.
Yeah.
But anyway, Mark, that's all I got for you today. Good having you. Good talking to you.
Appreciate you being here. Thanks. All right, let's soak in that score. We're at 11 minutes left in the third quarter. Oregon is trailing Boise State 20-14. Hope you took Boise State in the 19.5 points. Although, if Oregon is the Oregon of the past, remember when Oregon used to play these games, and I'm talking Chip Kelly days, Oregon, where they would be playing a game like this, and they would scuffle along, and they would be a 32-point favorite against Colorado, and they'd only be winning by 3 points in the fourth quarter. And before you knew it, they scored 5 touchdowns and they beat the spread. They would do that all over the place. But so we've got that one, and really that's the game of significance. Although let's keep an eye on, of course, we got Wazoo leading Texas Tech 27-10 at home. And of course, Wazoo and Oregon State have those odd Mountain West Conference schedules. So let's see if Washington State and possibly Oregon State, I know they play each other. Then they also have their dates against Washington and Oregon. But the way Oregon's playing right now, shoot, they got to play Oregon State. They may lose that game. But otherwise, those two teams could possibly sweep the Mountain West and have really nice records at the end of the year. And then we've got Arizona State leading Mississippi State. So a downer for the Big Ten, right, or for the SEC right there, as Mississippi State is getting trounced right now by an Arizona State team that, if they hold on to this lead, will be 2-0. And apparently, Arizona State's just scored a touchdown to go up after the PAT, would assume 27-3 on Mississippi State. Ouch. Okay, so the SEC taking one on the chin right there. All right, let's keep it rolling here at the Voice of College Football. We got Hunter on the line. Hunter, what's going on?
How's it going, Mark?
I'm doing well. What's up?
Well, thank you for not giving up on Alabama, even though it was rough tonight.
I know better.
Yeah, people have such short-term memory. I mean, we struggled against this team last year, and that's like you said, that was a loss that I think propelled us into being so good last year. I think they gave the guys a little perspective.
Well, it's kind of funny since you bring that up because I was sitting in the same spot, although I was about 1,000 miles away, but I was basically sitting in the same spot and talking to all of you after Alabama lost to Texas. And people were saying Alabama season's over, they're done, they're horrible. And then, of course, that was confirmed the next week. And I remember my stance was, no, Nick Saban coaches this team. They're loaded with 4 and 5 stars. They'll correct it. They will know what to do with Jalen Milroe. They will dumb down the offense or do whatever they need to make him successful, and they will be fine. I'm not predicting a national championship, but they will be fine, and they will most likely make the playoff. And I remember just preaching that for about 3 hours to the fine folks here after Alabama struggled against USF last year.
I mean, I'm still optimistic about this team. Yeah, really all the penalties really came down to one guy, and that's Wilkin Formby. He had 6 holding calls. I think the statistic was that we gave up 200 yards because of penalties. I believe that was the statistic. And the plays that we gave up 2 touchdowns to penalties. So you take those penalties away, and this game looks a lot different on the scoreboard, and it probably feels a lot better of a win than what it feels like right now.
Well, you could put it that way, but you could also consider that it was 14-13 in the fourth quarter, and a lot of people are just going to wake up tomorrow morning and see that Alabama won 42-16.
Right. But I mean, I think there is some positives that I did see tonight. I always look at games, even when we're playing bad. I like to look at the positives, see what we can build up on. And I think we can build upon our running game. I think our running game was a lot better in the second half. I still think that Jalen gets a little hesitant and can't make up his mind when he should run and when he should throw the ball. And I think that needs to be corrected. I think he needs to make a definitive decision and just it's okay to run. It's okay to not have the big play down the field if it gets us a first down, or if it even gets us 5 or 6 yards. At least we get another chance to to execute the first down and wait for that big play to develop. That's something that I've taken away from these last 2 games.
So you're not that sure that Jalen Milroe has yet to figure out decision making?
Not completely.
Okay. Well, I don't know that anyone gets that completely because they're out there with 11 guys coming after them and they have to make split-second decisions. So I've yet to see anybody in the quarterback position in college football, especially, that has perfect decision making. They've got to make a split-second decision. And I don't know, isn't he one of the top 5 to 10 quarterbacks in college football?
No, you're right. What I'm saying is, I think he's always looking for that big play down the field instead of, making the decision to get us closer to maybe a first down instead of looking for that big, down the field throw.
Well, I might be wrong, but it seemed to me as though after they played USF last year and brought him back off the bench, that they decided he's going to do 3 things. He is going to drop back to pass, and he's going to look. We're going to have somebody streaking down the field on a 9 route, and then we're going to have a guy in the flat, and he's either going to check it down to the guy in the flat if the bomb's not open, or he's going to see a hole where somebody's missed their rush lane, and he's going to take off with the football. He's going to do 1 to 3 things every play.
Right. Well, and to your point there, I did see tonight where he did make a play where he kind of made that pass there to Jeremy Bernard instead of taking the sack. He kind of just threw it to him kind of on a slant route, and got us the first down. So maybe I just get frustrated in the moment when I see that. I don't know. I don't know if that's just me being a fan or really what that is. But sometimes I feel like that he just always tries to look for the huge play instead of taking what the defense is giving them.
I continue to be amazed at these quarterbacks at that level when you really consider what's required to be processed in their brain and what they have to deal with all at the same time. And I think the moment that I gained the most appreciation for quarterbacks, and obviously what they do at the NFL level is like 10 times tougher, but when they came out with the overhead camera that started to shoot the games from behind the quarterback, and you saw, and then they would start to break down the plays on the replay, and you would see where everybody was positioned, meaning their intended receiver versus the coverage when the ball was leaving their hand. So they'd already made a decision. So they had already committed to a decision, but still the ball was just leaving their hand. And you would see this is what they're looking at right now, let alone a fraction of a second earlier when they had yet to commit to make a decision. And the intended receiver is nowhere close to where they're going to be. The coverage is nowhere close to where it's going to be when that ball arrives downfield, but they had to anticipate all of that. It's pretty impressive to me. I think it's the most difficult thing to do in sports. Now, throwing a baseball or hitting a baseball is the most difficult individual skill. But when you throw in all the factors of guys rushing you that want to like break you in two, and all the chaos and all the confusion and all the guys running around downfield and not knowing who's going to go where and trying to anticipate all of that, I think it's the most difficult position to play in sports.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I think that's the case too. I think sometimes we as fans just don't understand what it's fully like to be an athlete in that capacity. Sometimes we look at it from a purely fan perspective. Some of us who've not even played the sport,
Yeah. Well, many of us played it at some level, but I think we would even be shocked to a degree if we just walked out on a football field and stood where the quarterback, we determined, okay, without anybody else being out there, once they take a drop, where they are behind the line of scrimmage, even if they just have to throw a check down, how far that guy is.
Right.
Which on TV just looks like you just flick your wrist and dump the ball off to him.
Yeah. Well, Mark, and another thing that today, and we talked about it a little bit with the last caller. I nailed my 2 bets this week.
Good.
I thought that a for sure thing was Texas beating Michigan.
Sure.
And I felt very strong that Nebraska was going to beat Colorado.
Yep.
And I was surprised. I thought it was going to be a closer game than it was at Nebraska. I still thought that Nebraska was going to cover. Now I got it at it when it came down to 6.5, but I still thought they would cover even at 7. And I thought that's around what it would be. I didn't expect them to beat Colorado that convincingly and to dominate them. I was watching. I had the Alabama game on one TV and Nebraska on another, and they just dominated them. I mean, just completely dominated on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I watched the game too. And I can't say that I watched much past when it was 21-0 because I just thought Nebraska is just so physically superior to Colorado on both sides of the ball. They are just their backs, their receivers, when they get the ball in their hands, they are just trucking guys in the secondary. And of course, the defense is just chasing Shitter Sanders all over the field and just annihilating the offensive line. So it was just a physical domination by Nebraska. Like you, I picked Nebraska to cover the spread. I thought it was going to be a competitive game, a decent game, but it clearly wasn't.
Right, and I got a question for you about Nebraska. I have a real good friend of mine who is a diehard Nebraska fan, When Scott Frost got hired at Nebraska, did you think it was just an absolute home run hire?
Yes.
Okay. I felt the same way, and he said that every other Nebraska fan felt the same way.
Yep.
That they thought that he was just a, and I hate that didn't work out. I really do. I thought Scott Frost did an amazing job when he was at UCF, and I thought that he was just going to go in there and do good. And
Yep.
for whatever reason, he couldn't get it done. But on to the Texas game. Texas, I thought in the first quarter, I thought, okay, well, Nebraska, Michigan's they might can hang in here. And then Texas just, after that first touchdown, just kind of walked away from the game. And I think the Texas dominated more than the score indicated.
Yeah, they did. Real quick, back to Scott Frost. There are 3 basic reasons why I thought that was a home run hire. And if anybody says today that they don't think it was a home run hire, I would need to see documentation that proves that they thought that at the time. Like, I would need to see a video. I would need to see some kind of article or something that substantiates that they did not believe that, because I didn't hear anyone who thought that that was a bad hire, because the guy was an exceptional offensive coordinator at Oregon. They scored a ton of points, ton of yardage, and that obviously set him up for the UCF job. And nobody thought in 2017, when UCF was 0-12 2 years earlier, that somebody could lift them to a place where they were going to beat a team like Auburn in a bowl game and go undefeated. That was just completely unthinkable at the time. And then thirdly, anytime somebody goes back to their alma mater, you just figure that they have an understanding of the campus, the culture, the people. They're at home. They have extra incentive to succeed. They want to be there. They're not just taking the next job on the ladder up. And all those things come into play as to, again, creating more incentive and them having a better understanding, and therefore having a leg up on what most coaches would have to deal with at that university. So I thought Scott Frost was a great hire at Nebraska, and I believe just about everybody else did as well. Now back to Texas. So I made a bad pick there. So I've done this like 3 times already. I usually do this like 3 times a year, but I've already done it 3 times in 2 weeks, where I pretty much just stuck to, even though all evidence pointed to the contrary, I stuck to the thought that I'm going to stay with Michigan until they prove that they're a different team. Even though what we saw last week was Texas annihilate somebody 52-0, and they're also obviously a playoff team from last year that lost a few pieces but replaced most of them, and they got an NFL quarterback, and the quarterback comparison isn't even one. And then Michigan looked like a very troubled team last week against Fresno State. And I even said this before today's game, and then it turned out to be true, but I still missed the prediction because I stuck to my guns and stuck with Michigan, is that I thought, well, this team is a defense. So Texas is a complete team. Michigan's a team with a defense and a tight end and some running backs. And that's what they are. And that pretty much proved to be true. And if anything, I would have expected Michigan's defense to play better and to hold together and to deep into the second half. And so the concerning thing for me, if I would be a Michigan fan, would be that the defense was giving up chunk plays from the first drive. It's not like they got wore down. They just got obliterated from the first drive on.
Right. Well, here's was my thinking on the Texas-Michigan game. I thought, okay, well, they lost their head coach. They lost their star quarterback. They lost Blake Corum. And I just thought that Texas had the better offense and the better quarterback. And I thought that their defense would be more improved this year than it had been in the year just past. And so I just thought that was just -7 was a great bet on that game. and obviously turned out to be the case. But I just didn't think that Michigan would be the same team after losing that much. From losing all those players and the head coach.
Okay. All right, Hunter. Anything
Yeah,
else?
one more thing.
Yeah.
What do you think about the whole Nick Saban's field at Bryant-Denny? I thought that was a pretty cool thing to see, and it's kind of surreal because I never thought that Nick Saban would be retiring this early. I thought he was going to be one of these guys who he would retire when he croaked.
I think that he's earned that honor. I'm not really into those sorts of things myself, so I really have nothing else to say about it in regards to watching the ceremony or anything like that. I knew that something was going on, but I didn't exactly know what that was per se. But he's obviously earned it as much as anybody else has anywhere.
Yeah, he has, and it's I think it's so cool that he walked away when he thought he should, and he deserves this retirement to spend time with his family and just to be there for his grandkids. So even though I'm sad to see him move on to other things, it's good to see him on College Game Day and seeing that he still wants to be involved, but not just in a 24-hour a day capacity.
Exactly. Yep.
All right. Well,
All right,
you,
Hunter.
Mark. Talk to you next time.
I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
All right, let's get to these super chats coming in. We got our buddy Kyle checking in tonight. And for a second straight night, it appears as though the Voice of College Football is brought to you by Kyle Pickett. We had a local boy die on the field Friday. I send this to hopefully get others to pray for his family in this devastating time. He had offers from Vandy, was an 8 honor roll kid, and mentorshipped 2 children without praise from most. So I don't know where that occurred. I don't know if we could find that online, but that is extremely unfortunate. So our prayers. And I know that a lot of people use that term prayers, but I mean, legitimately, I will be praying tonight before I go to bed, and I will be praying for that young man's family and his loved ones, anybody that called him friend in the entire school. And that's difficult then for those people left behind, meaning his classmates, his friends, them to deal with that a 17 or 18-year-old boy was taken from us. So that's unfortunate. Kyle, thank you so much for the contribution, and thank you for letting us know about that unfortunate situation. There we have his name, Chance Gaynor. Pray for his family. And again, Kyle, thank you for letting us know that, and we will just go ahead and leave that right there. All right. Appreciate everyone being here at the Voice of College Football. This is what we do during the season, folks. So just make it a destination. Like, what games you're going to watch every Saturday. Just tack on to that at the end. Voice of College Football, 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time, because that is typically when the primetime games are just about over. So we jump on at 11:30 at the least, at the latest. Sometimes we'll jump on a little bit early if the games are blowouts and there's really nothing going on. And we obviously are going to monitor the late games, but I wanted to finish out and see. I was going to jump on here a little bit earlier, but Alabama was in that tussle with South Florida. And of course, the Oklahoma-Houston game was close. So I wanted to see those to completion. And so we hit the mark at 11:30 p.m. Eastern with all of you. All right, we got our buddy Michael stopping by. Michael, what's going on tonight?
Hey, Mark, how you doing, sir?
I am doing well. How are you?
Okay, first of all, my deepest condolences to his family and his friends and classmates and teammates, wherever he's from. May God have his wealth over his family at this difficult time right now.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, I got eat the crow. I was wrong about Texas. I thought it would have been a closer game, but it wasn't.
Well, so did I.
Mm-hmm. But I got to ask you this, Mark. When did you think Notre Dame was in trouble?
When did I think they were in trouble? Well, I didn't watch the game until the final drive. Let's see. They played the 2:30 game. This is what
Well,
happens with Notre
3:30.
Dame.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I think it was 3:30, but I digress.
Well, I think they play at 2:30.
Okay. Anyway.
I might be wrong. For generations, they've been playing at 2:30 in the afternoon on NBC.
But ever since Indiana went to daylight savings time, I think they pushed it to 3:30.
Okay.
But like I said, I digress.
Well, the game was over far before the other 3:30 games. So anyway, regardless, because they play at 2:30 in the afternoon Eastern time when everybody else plays at 3:30, and I'm already watching noon games, I've always gotten lost with Notre Dame. They have always lost me on their timing of their games. So I breeze by them a lot when I'm like, oh wow, they're playing USC. That's right, I forgot about that. And so anyway, I was not paying too much attention to the score, and I just figured it would correct itself at some point, and then it didn't. And obviously, it continued to be 14-13. And then the other thing is that I do these instant analysis videos, so that takes me
which
away from
are
these
classics.
games. Well, thank you, I appreciate that, but they kind of take me away. Unfortunately, for the 3:30 games, I'm recording the noon recaps, and especially with Arkansas and Oklahoma State going into overtime. So by the time I get back to the 3:30 games, they're well into the second quarter and so forth. So I'm looking at Notre Dame, and so then once I saw there was like 5-6 minutes left on the clock, is when I checked in on that game. So I can't say that I really took it that seriously until they were into the fourth quarter.
Yep, it looked like Oregon just struck on an 85-yard play by Tez Johnson. So I just see it
Okay.
updated on your
Gotcha.
monitor there.
I see
All
that.
right, I gotta ask you this: next Saturday at Ross State Stadium is gonna be rocking
Yes. Okay. Yep.
because Notre Dame comes in town.
Sure.
What do you think the spread might be?
The spread. That's a good question. Let's see. I'm going to say they're playing at Ross 8 Stadium. I'm going to say that Notre Dame's going to be an 8-point favorite.
Okay. So which way do you think you go? You think you'll take Notre Dame in the points, or you think you're taking Purdue and taking the points? I mean,
well, with a lot of these teams, it seems to sway back and forth, meaning Penn State had a great week one, and then they fell back and they didn't come through. And Notre Dame, the same thing, and then they swing back. It's almost like the stock market. Like you can determine that, okay, well, the stock market's gone up for 3 consecutive days. Well, people are going to sell off and it's going to go down today. Now, I'm not saying that that's a perfect formula, but it happens more than not. And so these teams tend to sway back and forth and fluctuate. So if Notre Dame's got any, and I know they do, character on the team and grit, then they will have a determined focus week of practice this week, and they'll be ready to roll next week at Purdue.
Yeah. So do you think Purdue has to have a great crisp week of practice to have a chance, or do you think it's just going to be they go in there and just going to run roughshod against Purdue?
Oh no, they're not going to run roughshod over Purdue. No, I don't think so. It's possible. Anything's possible if Purdue turns the ball over 3 or 4 times, but as long as it's a reasonably well played game, sure, Notre Dame's better, but I don't expect them to run roughshod over Purdue. I don't think they have the offensive weapons or the quarterback to do it.
Then what makes you talk about Purdue, or you talking about Notre Dame?
I'm talking about Notre Dame.
Then why is it everybody, if Riley Leonard's not that good and stuff like that, I think if Purdue can get the running game established going early, then Notre Dame might be in trouble. That's just me though. But anyway, wasn't it week 3 last year? If I'm not mistaken, did Marshall pretty much put Notre Dame out of their misery?
2 years ago.
Or was it because Notre Dame didn't make the playoff last year either, did they?
No.
Okay, I was just wondering. 'Cause I thought it was last year, but and stuff like that.
No, that was
Now,
2 years ago.
all right. Now, was Alabama toying around with South Florida?
I don't believe so. I would think that Alabama would have had motivation, incentive to blast South Alabama since they struggled with them
Or
last
South
year, and they had
Alabama?
to hear about that. Or South Florida
Florida.
last year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was just wondering. I seen Clemson bounce back today.
Yes, they
Pretty
did.
consistently.
I didn't figure that was going to happen. Few things
Nah.
surprised me because if you've been watching this sport for long enough, nothing's really going to surprise anybody. But when I first saw like 42-7, I didn't see a score until I think it was 42-7. And I thought, wow, Clemson's got an offense. And unless App State, this is the worst App State team in over a decade, that's a pretty significant statement because App State doesn't lose
That
badly
bad.
to anybody.
Mm-hmm. I gotta ask you a couple more things. I gotta ask you. One, is there any chance after the show you can come out with your top 25?
I started working on it during the
Okay.
second half of these blowout games, but it's not done because obviously we've got a few games like Arizona State could be going to 2-0. It looks like they will. And Oregon, they're struggling. And there's a
Arizona
lot to
struggling a little
consider.
bit.
Pardon me?
Was Arizona? I think they was up, what, 13-10?
And Arizona, although those teams were not in my top 25 last week.
Okay. Now,
Of course, I was told I was an idiot for not having Oregon in my top 25 last week.
well, no, they didn't. They had a tight game. You gotta give credit for Tato playing a good game.
That's
Now,
right.
which game was more impressive to you tonight? Syracuse, Georgia Tech, or Kansas, Illinois?
I'm going to say Kansas, Illinois. I'm going to say that Illinois winning its first game against a ranked opponent since 2019 against Wisconsin
Mm-hmm.
and being an underdog. I know Syracuse was as well, but they were playing at home. And Kansas has such a dynamic offense. And for Illinois to hold them to 17 points, I just saw the end of that game. I would love to go back and watch that game. If I could go back and watch any game from this weekend, I think that I didn't see, I think I would watch Kansas and Illinois. I want to see how Illinois got that done. Somebody called us last night. I believe it was Sean called us last night, and he was befuddled that Kansas was a 4-point favorite and that it wasn't a lot higher than that. And I said the same thing. I said, well, Vegas knows what they're doing, and I'm not going to be surprised if Illinois hangs in this game or wins the game. And I certainly wasn't. Not that I picked them to win, but yeah. So you got what is supposed to be one of the best teams in the Big 12 playing one of the worst teams in the Big 10, but Illinois got the job done.
Okay. Now, what is it with Kyle McCord having more success this year than he did last year at Ohio State?
He's having more success?
Yeah, it seemed like they loosened up the reins more on him. It seemed like, maybe he was just skittish and too tight last year, I guess.
Who do you think that Kyle McCord had bad games against last year?
No, I'm not saying bad games. I'm just saying.
No. I'm not saying that you're wrong in saying he had bad games. I'm just asking you, who did Kyle McCord not perform against last year versus who he's performing against this year?
Maybe Michigan, maybe Penn. I can't remember what he did against Michigan. I think he also had or maybe he was in Maryland or something. He had a subpar game. I don't know.
There you go. There you go. You are right on it. So Michigan and Penn State. Are we really going to compare the Ohio Bobcats and Georgia Tech defenses against those two teams?
No, but I'm seeing to me, it's like he's more freer and more. That's what I was just asking. Does he look more? Maybe he's just more comfortable. I don't know. He might look more comfortable and stuff like that. But like I said, you're more into Ohio State than I am. So,
well, he had more pressure on him last year, and none of us know what's going through his brain. He either didn't respond to that pressure and now he's playing at a school where there are less expectations and he's cutting loose, or maybe that's all imagined. He had a pretty good season last year. No, he
Yeah.
didn't play great. He didn't play up to CJ Stroud or Justin Fields standards, but he played well most of the season. And this year he's playing Georgia Tech and Ohio.
Mm-hmm. Now I got to ask you this. Next Saturday, because I think I'm not sure what time Wisconsin and Alabama plays, but which game you think is going to be more intriguing that you might watch?
Wisconsin, Alabama, or who?
Purdue, Notre Dame.
That's a good one. I want to see both of them. I would say I would rather watch Alabama and Wisconsin.
Okay. I know it's just stuff like that. I was just wondering stuff like, I don't know if today maybe stuff like that. But I want to turn the tables and talk about Indiana football.
Okay.
Going out to UCLA next week.
Yes.
Do you think they leave Pasadena with the win, or do you think they'll come back down to earth a little bit?
Well, there's a history of teams coming from the Midwest and from the East Coast and struggling on the West Coast just because of jet lag or whatever else you want to attribute it to. So that is something that there's a history of. That's not to excuse losing on the West Coast. But the way Indiana's played for 2 weeks, and I know that they played bad teams, but they played those bad teams much better than they have in years and years and years and years. Versus what UCLA put up against Hawaii. UCLA's got a slightly more talented team, but I think that's a toss-up. If you held a gun to my head, I'm still taking UCLA probably.
Yeah, me too, and stuff like that. No, and just is wondering stuff like that because I didn't know. I know it's only actually technically it's Sunday morning and stuff like that. So when will you have your schedules? I mean, are you gonna? So you're gonna actually? I think Bama will have an easy time at Camp Randall.
Yeah, I tend to think that too.
So I'm thinking, but I'm not sure what time the games are. Well, I know it's 3:30 on CBS, but I'm not sure what time the Alabama Wisconsin game.
I think it's a big noon kickoff.
Oh, is it?
I believe so.
Okay, I wasn't sure and stuff like because I thought I'd seen some wasn't sure and stuff. So, all right, not bad. So notwithstanding right now, the game's still going on. Best game of the day in your opinion so far?
Best game of the day
so far.
The best game that I saw, unless I'm missing one, was in a lot of ways, the most entertaining game I thought was the Arkansas-Oklahoma State game. But although I tried to tell people this last night, and I had all sorts of people in the chat rolling their eyes in such ways when I was saying I wanted to really watch Iowa and Iowa State, that was arguably the best game of the day.
Oh, what happened with that game? I heard that the Cyhawks going back to where's Iowa State from?
Ames.
I heard the Cyhawks going back to Ames. Is that true?
The game came down to the last play. I don't know why it's amusing to people that that could be the best game of the day. It probably was the best game of the day.
Okay.
I don't know what game would have been better. Tennessee, NC State turned out to be a flop.
Which I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised either. And a lot of other games, were lousy.
Okay. I got to ask, have you put out an MIA for Corey Bradley yet?
Well, I don't do that because he's on a show right after the game, so nobody has to figure out where to find him.
Oh, well, sometimes I didn't know. I figured he might have bad as it was or so. No, but I mean, was it just a back and forth game in Iowa? Didn't have they missed a field goal or something, or they get stopped on a fourth down play? I didn't get a chance to watch the game today.
Okay. Well, Iowa dominated the first half. They should have had a huge lead. They had a 13-0 lead. And then there was a scoring flurry, surprisingly, between the two teams there, where they scored 3 straight possessions on big plays. And Iowa State pretty much just chipped away, and they kicked 3 field goals at the end of the game. And the last one was with about 8 seconds left to win the game.
Okay. Sounds good. Just was wondering. All right, I know you got other callers. Mark,
Thanks,
thanks so
Michael.
much, son. God bless. And I finally got my Phil Steele magazine the other day.
Good for you.
I
All
appreciate
right.
it. Thanks, Mark.
Excellent.
Have a good one. Talk to you soon.
Thank
God
you,
bless.
Michael.
See ya.
Have a good one.
Bye.
All right. Let's keep it rolling here at the Voice of College Football. We've got Chris on the line. Chris, what's going on?
Oh, hey, Mark.
How you doing?
Good. I'm sorry to hear about who was it? A Vanderbilt player, I guess. I don't know who that was. It was what you were talking about, I guess. Was the Vanderbilt player that got killed?
No, this was a high school football player
Oh, I thought you said it
in
was
Florida.
I don't know who it was, but that's always terrible, I guess, whenever somebody gets killed in the football. I was just going to ask, I guess, do you have any thoughts, I guess, about just generally how, I mean, you probably already shared a lot of them, but I don't know, is there a game in particular that you really thought was, I think Michael maybe already asked you this, but a game that kind of stood out in your mind as being pretty important?
Well, yeah, I will just reiterate what I told Michael. I think the Iowa State game was the most important game of the day. I think that with this 12-team expanded playoff, that both of those teams had a shot at making the playoff. And now with Iowa, especially Iowa losing that game, that puts a huge hit on their resume, trying to make a playoff spot where Iowa State may have to win the Big 12 to get there anyway. So I think that was the most significant game of the day. Notre Dame, that could be argued as well. While the Iowa State game was considered to be a top game of the day, Notre Dame, obviously, nobody thought about that being a game that needed to be considered, and Notre Dame loses. And so that was a huge result. Everything else pretty much held to serve.
Yeah, I didn't notice too many, at least from what I could tell anyway. Didn't seem like there were that many upsets.
Yeah. Technically, Kansas lost to Illinois. That was an upset, but I don't think Kansas is going to be any kind of a factor.
I noticed, I saw something, I don't know what it was. It was a retrospective, I think, on the Colorado-Nebraska game. And they were interviewing Tom Osborne. This is from a long time ago, but he said he was more concerned about Kansas at the time. This is like in 1985 or something, but which is really surprising to me because I think that was his way of maybe just trying to put Colorado in a compromising position. He didn't want to admit that they had a rivalry with Colorado, I guess. He said he was looking forward to Kansas.
Well, when in fact was Colorado good enough to have a rivalry with Nebraska? I would think that would have been right at the end of the 1980s.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I just, they were asking Tom Osborne about, I guess it was before Colorado ever beaten them with McCartney. I think it was before they'd ever done it. So the way he chose to address the question was not that they didn't prepare for Colorado, but it was kind of a, I mean, to say that you're more interested in beating Kansas, I thought was a little bit of a, I don't really put Kansas on a pedestal.
That's funny.
Well, no, I don't know that he was necessarily maybe he's just being honest. I don't know, but I guess maybe we're not giving Kansas enough credit for who they are. I don't know. They are a pretty good team, I guess. It's just not the first team.
They are now. They weren't then.
Well, they're usually pretty good. I mean, they're not. I don't remember exactly where
Kansas?
Well, yeah, they're not terrible. I don't know how to.
No, they're terrible. They have a terrible history.
Well, at any rate, he said
like a terrible modern history. Not talking about Gale Sayers in the early 1960s, but talking about the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s.
Well, I understand they're not the first team you think about, but I think it might be one of those things where maybe they're just overlooked. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, there's a reason they're overlooked. That wouldn't you say? And I know you've looked into this as well, Chris. Iowa State, Kansas, Rutgers, Wake Forest, Oregon State, Northwestern, those are the worst programs of all time.
Well,
Vanderbilt.
I don't know, Mark. I mean, you might want to. I mean, I'm not.
Okay, well, they are.
No, not really. I mean,
then who is?
Huh?
Then who is?
Well, I mean, it's all about perspective. I don't know.
No, it's not about perspective. It's about numbers. And the numbers have to be given some context, yes, but it's about numbers. It's not about perspective.
You're going to start saying Well, I mean, it lends itself to other things that I don't know that I really agree with, but
If
I
if
understand what you're
George
saying.
is 11-1 and Vanderbilt's 1-11, is it about perspective? No, it's not about perspective. It's about how good the teams are,
No,
reflected by
I
their
agree with you.
records.
I don't know that it's fair to put those teams in like a position where they can't defend themselves. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Those are the worst teams in power conference
You
football
forgot
in
Virginia,
history.
but I mean, if you want to
Virginia,
point,
yeah, they would be in that
oh,
conversation
they
as
are,
well.
but I mean, but again, I don't really. That's not really how I choose to look at it. But I'm not saying you're wrong, but it's like Rutgers. I mean, that's actually a pretty good team. But if you want to look at them as not being good, I guess that's fine.
They've
But
been horrible for most of their history.
well, again, I don't know if I agree with that, but that's fine. I guess you have a right to your opinion. So
It's
you can
it's
say the
not
same thing
really
about.
much of an opinion. It's more about just evaluating the facts.
Well, I agree with you on some of what you're telling me, Mark. Except that I don't know how to put it other than I think it's a tough to play in that sort of what to have to go against the best teams, like even like you say Kansas. I mean, I know we have a history where there was like what was it, the Big Two and the Little Six or whatever it was, and I don't know that any of those teams were all that good, but compared to the top two, but the fact they ended up playing, says something about the way they can challenge if needed. I don't know that you're wrong. I just don't know how much I really buy into that argument, but that's okay. Vanderbilt actually has a pretty good record as far as they're better than what you might think they are.
No, they don't.
Well, Mark, I don't know. I mean,
Vanderbilt does not have a good record all time.
well, it isn't that bad.
No,
It's
it's
not.
horrible.
All right. Well, that's fine. I don't want to challenge you on that because it's not really worth challenging. But I think it is partly about perspective. They wouldn't be in the SEC if they were that bad. That's how I want to end that one, I guess. And maybe Kansas wouldn't be in the Big 12 if they were as bad as you say they are, but that's okay. Are you going to say Iowa State wasn't good either?
Iowa State's horrible.
Okay, well, that's what I mean.
Not right now, but historically, they're terrible.
Okay.
We were just talking about this the other night, and for some reason, somebody brought up Iowa State, and I had to show them that they have finished ranked 3 times in their history.
Well, that's
3
kind of,
times.
without like making too much of it, how important is being ranked? I mean,
Regardless of how important it is, it's a valid evaluation of the team for that season. If you never finish ranked, then you've got a horrible football program.
no, okay. So that was your argument, and I don't like having to bring this up again, but that was your argument against BYU being a champion was that they didn't play anybody any good, which I don't know if that's really completely true. I mean, there's some truth to it because, strength schedule is, it's priority. But they played some good teams. But if you don't want to admit that they played good teams, then there's not a whole lot I can do to get you to believe it. Not every team they played was good, but not every team they played was bad.
Okay, let me just put it this way, and then we'll move on. If you're looking at any group of anything, I don't care if it's chefs or accountants or what it is, and they have to be ranked. If there is a way to judge their performance, and in football, it's easier because teams win games and they lose games.
Sure.
That's what it really comes down to. You win games, you lose games, and we've got a clear-cut metric for that. That it's easy to then categorize them as being elite or being good, competitive, and then on down the line. And if you have one of the 3 worst records in the history of the sport, you're awful, historically awful.
Which team are you? I guess I'm lost on that one. Who are the
Let's say Iowa State, any of the ones I just mentioned.
Well, I think Rutgers is a good team. So I'm going to disagree with you on that.
When you say they're a good team, I'm not talking about a team. I'm talking about a program over history.
So am I.
No, they're not.
Well, they're not the elite, but they're not the worst team. I mean,
they have one of the 5 worst records in history.
Well, I don't know. Like I said, it's partly about what you want to see, I guess. If you don't want to see it differently, that's fine, Mark. But, Vanderbilt, like I said, if they weren't as good as they were, they wouldn't be in the SEC. There's just if there was somebody better they could bring in there, they would probably. So, I mean, I think you're wrong about them not being.
There are better teams that they could bring in. That doesn't mean that they're looking to send schools off to other conferences and bring in different schools. Vanderbilt is a horrific football program in its history.
And then,
So
okay,
was Iowa State, so was Kansas, so was Rutgers, so was Oregon State.
if you're going to use that high of a bar, then you're going to have to say that SMU is pretty bad. BYU would be pretty bad. Teams that I don't consider to be very bad.
BYU? No.
Well, I'm using the same bar, so I think Vanderbilt. I don't know. I remember exactly, but I think they're roughly comparable, BYU and Vanderbilt. So if you're saying Vanderbilt sucks, then that means BYU sucks. I mean, I know it's not necessarily not comparing an apple to an apple, but I think I've done the homework. I kind of know. I don't know to the extent that maybe I should, but there isn't a big difference between the two to justify
Okay.
necessarily.
Well, I apologize to our viewers. This is more of an off-season discussion, and we're not getting anywhere. So why did you call?
Well, that was part of it, I guess. I just wanted to know what your perspective was. You say that what matters for any team, I guess, is to be relevant. I don't know. I can't speak for you directly, but I don't know that you can ask for a better school, particularly to be in the SEC than Vanderbilt. And so it's like I don't quite understand what you're using to determine who should be there and who shouldn't. If you don't want
I never
Vanderbilt
made
there,
any kind of claim about who shouldn't be there.
they probably don't
I do not
prioritize.
want Vanderbilt to be taken out of the SEC.
Well, that's not
I didn't
either.
say anything like that.
They probably don't prioritize. I think it was just recently I saw a special about, and Vanderbilt probably doesn't prioritize their football team. It's probably what it is. It might be
Sure.
just that simple. Okay. So they're probably not going to, if they do well, that's kind of almost against the norm. I agree with you on that. And I think it had to do with Penn State's coach that used to be there. What's his name? Anyway.
James Franklin.
Yeah, he took them to not to the extent. I mean, they weren't like, I think they were like 9-4 or something. I mean,
They went 9-4 2 straight years.
They
Yep.
weren't like, yeah. But for Vanderbilt, that's pretty good.
Sure. It's very good.
I don't really agree that just because it's Vanderbilt that it's not a team that's worth scheduling or worth playing or worth beating.
I didn't say any of those things. I said that they were one of the worst programs in the history of college football, major college football, and that's not debatable.
Well, I think it is.
No, it is not debatable.
Well,
okay, we got to start with a premise that if you have a category of teams, and in this case, it's Power 4 teams, and you've got 70 of them, then by pure definition, the worst 5 or 10 you are going to call horrible. They're failing. Well, somebody has to fail. There are wins and losses every game. Somebody has to fail. And so if you're the worst at something, then you were the worst. You're horrific at that.
Well, they're the worst at the elite level. That's what you're saying. You're not saying that they're the worst teams in college football. You're saying that they're the worst at the elite level, which actually
the college football that we discuss, which is major college football, the schools that I've just mentioned over the last 10 minutes, those are the worst programs in history.
I don't know that there's an athletics program better than Iowa State University.
What?
Athletics? There might not be a better athletics program than Iowa State University.
Stanford, UCLA, Texas, Florida, Ohio State, Michigan. I can keep going.
I met somebody that went there once, and they had really good athletics there at Iowa State. It might not include football. I'll be fair. I mean, it might not include football, but from a broader perspective, I think they're one of the better athletics programs in the nation.
When have they ever been to a Final Four?
Iowa State, I don't know for
in basketball, never.
Probably never. But
when have they ever been to a College World Series in baseball?
Oh, I don't know.
Never.
Okay. Well,
all right, we digress. So what did you call about, Chris?
Vanderbilt has a great baseball team. So there you go.
Vanderbilt does. We talk about football here. All right, what's your point, Chris?
I made my point.
Okay, you made your point
you're setting a bar. You're setting an impossible bar, Mark.
I'm not setting an impossible bar.
You're setting a bar that one team can clear. You know who the team is? I don't even have to tell anybody.
No.
Yes.
If there are 70 schools in power conference play and you have one of the 3 or 4 worst records of all time, you have had a bad football program. I'm not raising them to an elite status that they've got to be Notre Dame or Alabama all time. No. I'm just saying they're one of the worst, and that's clearly reflected by the numbers.
I'll get back to you on that, but I don't really know that that's really true. But
It
that's
is
fine.
true.
I think Vanderbilt has a good football team. I'm sorry, I don't agree with you, but it's okay that you feel that way. I don't really have a
I
problem.
don't feel it has nothing to do with my feelings. Nothing. I don't
Okay.
care.
They don't excel at the highest level of football. I mean,
No, I'm not even talking about excelling at the highest level. I'm talking about being capable. Vanderbilt loses 9 and 10 football. They have one of the worst programs in the history of college football. That is reflected by never winning championships. That's reflected by not going to bowl games, not winning bowl games, never going to major bowl games. That's reflected by never being ranked. That's reflected by losing 9 or 10 games every year and having one of the worst records in the history of the sport. It's not debatable. It's not based on my feelings or opinion, even.
well, do me
Now,
a
we
favor.
can have an opinion over, are they the third worst of all time or the second worst of all time? Yes, that's where opinion comes into it in analyzing the numbers, but the numbers are clear. It's like saying, what if I said USC is not one of the greatest football programs of all time? It's not one of the 10 best. Well, then you would refute that by saying, Mark, if you looked at Rose Bowl championships, number one teams, top 10 teams, all the metrics that we would look at, NFL draft selections, USC is clearly one of the 10 best football programs of all time. And I'd say, no, I really don't feel like they are. Well, to hell with what I feel. That doesn't mean anything. That's not substantial. It's not valid. USC does have a great all-time football. It's just the opposite perspective. I'm just flipping the argument to prove a point that it has nothing to do with opinion or how you feel.
All right. Look into 1982. Air Force defeated Vanderbilt in the last game, the bowl game. I don't know how good Vanderbilt was, but it was a game that put Air Force kind of on the map. And it wasn't a lousy Vanderbilt team that they beat. It was a decent Vanderbilt team. I'm not sure what game it was. Was it the Independence Bowl? I really don't know. It's
Yes, I
wherever
believe
Vanderbilt
so.
plays.
I'm almost positive I watched that game.
No, I think it's where Vanderbilt plays. So not only was it against Vanderbilt, I think it was against Vanderbilt in their home stadium, and Air Force beat them. And I don't know. I don't want to hear that they weren't a good team because they were a good team. In
I'm not
1982,
talking about them randomly having a good team every 20 years.
random.
This is a ridiculous conversation, Chris. Do you have
Well,
anything else concerning what happened today in college football?
Well, that was kind of my point. It's like I don't think we're going to see the same teams win it all every time. I mean, yeah, I know USC is probably not only the 10 best teams. There's probably like maybe even the top
We're
5.
not going to see the same teams win championships every year. Have you been paying attention to this sport?
Well, I understand where you're coming from, Mark. I know that you want it to be Ohio State probably every year, and I don't know that you're wrong about
Well,
that.
of course, I'm a fan. Just like
Well,
I could go through the chat, and all the people that I know that root for teams, they would want their team to win the championship every year.
you probably in 1984, you probably wanted the Rose Bowl to decide it all.
But that has nothing to do with. No, I am not an idiot. I wanted the best team to be the national champion
Who was the best?
and to be recognized as the national champion. Chris, you're not making any sense at this point.
I am. Who was
So
it?
if you say something of value, I'm going to give you one more chance to do so.
I just want to know your reasoning behind. I went back. You said to do it, so I did. I listened to the entire conversation about why it wasn't BYU, and it doesn't really make sense to me. I'm not saying you're wrong. It just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense that it wasn't BYU. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, we'll talk about that some other time.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm talking about 1984 BYU when we just had 60 football games played today.
No, I agree. I understand.
All right, Chris.
All right. Have a good day.
Have a good night. Bye. All right, Adam, save me. How you doing tonight?
All right, Mark, how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
Great to talk to you. I just have a couple of brief points. I won't be on long. So the first point I had was, so Alabama struggled a lot tonight against South Florida. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Auburn lost to Cal. And Iowa lost to Iowa State. What we're seeing is a lot of teams that really traditionally should never challenge these teams actually beating them. And my question to you is, what do you think the cause of this is? Do you think it's that there's more parity, or do you think that we have a new generation of players who are so, interested in how much money they're making and so individualistic that teams are essentially breaking down and, essentially causing these kind of anomalies in college football that traditionally haven't been there. My second question, and I really want your advice on this because, look, I went to graduate school at Alabama, and my girlfriend graduated from there. I love Alabama football. Of course, I'm a USC fan first and foremost. But I have never been sold on Jalen Milroe. I think he's a poor quarterback. I think he's holding Alabama back, and I don't think we'll ever win a national championship with him. But the support for him is so unconditional that I don't understand it. And I'd like to know your thoughts on both of those questions, if you can maybe educate me on why these phenomena are happening.
Okay, so the first point, what I would want to see before I would believe in your theory about there being more of a aggregate to the median, meaning
Right.
more less elite teams, less horrible teams, and more equity across the sport, is that based on my recollection of the records every year for these teams, I don't see that reflected in the records, meaning that we seem to have the same disparity of records throughout the sport every year. We have one or two undefeated teams, if that. Then at the end of the regular season, we usually have 3 or 4 11-1 teams. Then we've got about 6 or 7 10-2 teams, and on down the line. And that spectrum of records seems to be very consistent from year to year, as opposed to what you are claiming is taking place. Wouldn't that result in there being less 11-1 teams, less 10-2 teams, more 6-6, 7-5, 5-7 teams? Correct?
Correct.
Well, I don't think we're seeing that. We've yet to see. We have to wait for this season to play out, but we haven't seen that the last few years.
We haven't, but I think that might play out this year. But I also think the implication of what you're saying is that we should really have a 14 playoff. Because if indeed history repeats itself and is consistent with how teams have performed, you're going to have 3 or 4 teams at the top that are undefeated or at worst one-loss teams. So why are we having a 12-team playoff when we're going to have teams that I think are going to be so bunched together because of losses to teams like Northern Illinois and Cal, such that it's impossible to determine not only who should be in the top 12, but why people outside the top 12 shouldn't be there. So why not shrink it back to the top 4 to be consistent with what you just argued?
All right. So, Adam, you being a member of society and reality, you don't need to ask me why we've got an expanded playoff. So we can have the discussion based on reality, or we can have a philosophical discussion based on what should be implemented that is going to be the best for the sport and going to result in the most representative champion. So if you want to have a philosophical discussion, we can do that. But the reality is there's an expanded playoff because they'll play more games and make more money.
Well, I think you're right. And I think that the reality is different than what the ideal would be.
Yes.
And what are your thoughts on that? Are you comfortable with that?
Well, I always think that you're extremely well thought out and you bring some outside the box thinking to it, which is either extremely wise and insightful, or at the very least causes us to reflect on and consider some other options. But the one thing that I would say about some of your ideas is they can't always be applied from season to season. And obviously we can't come to the conclusion of a regular season and say, okay, what would be best this season to do? Oh, this season it would be good to do an 8-team playoff because these 8 teams are clearly better than everyone else based on X, Y, and Z metrics. Therefore, let's play an 8-team playoff this year. And then at the conclusion of next season, we say, you know what? These 2 teams are way better than everybody else. Let's just play a championship game. Obviously, we can't do that. So we have to put in place a system that is generally going to be what's best for the sport.
You know, you sound like my supervisor at the college I work at. He always tells me that the best is the enemy of the good, and the goal should be to be good, not to be the best. And I think I get your point. I mean, maybe the 12-team playoff is good. Maybe there's a more idealistic solution, but is it sustainable? I admit I don't know.
Well,
So
I think that what you seem to be proposing and have brought up in the past would be revolutionary in some ways. It would be very quirky and interesting, and that is exactly what I just stated. We would come to the conclusion of every season and basically review the results and come to a determination who clearly has earned a right to play for the championship, and that would be a different amount of teams every year, and therefore we would revise the playoff format every year.
well, maybe that would be the solution then, that we should actually revise the playoff every year instead of having a uniform system so that we can adapt it to changing circumstances. I mean, but that would also be revolutionary. I'm sure it wouldn't get support. The other thing I was just wondering is, when people disagree with me so substantially, it causes me to think maybe I'm wrong because, I'm not like a narcissist or why do people love Jalen Milroe so much? I don't understand it.
Are these Alabama fans or just general college football fans?
Generally Alabama fans, but having been to Alabama, I know the fans generally can be critical of their players, but they seem to love Milroe and blame everything else that plagues Alabama football on anyone but Milroe. And I'm wondering, am I missing something when I say I don't think he's a good QB and won't be in the NFL and shouldn't be the starter at Bama? What am I missing?
Well, Adam, you're a smart guy. You don't miss too much. So I'll say this. I think a lot of things that I'm about to bring up are in play psychologically. We as humans, for as complicated as we are, fall into patterns of thinking that aren't necessarily logical. And one of those may be what expectations are fulfilled or not fulfilled, meaning that if there's a 5-star quarterback that our team signs and there is a heap of expectations on that particular player, and let's say that player comes out and in their first 3 games of their career lived up to these expectations and they're phenomenal. Well, then everything that they do aside from winning championships after that statistically then becomes a disappointment because we've been conditioned a certain way.
Right.
Vice versa, when somebody like Jalen Milroe, not much is expected of him, and his first splash on the national scene was a disappointment against Texas, and then a follow-up being benched against South Florida, and then he kind of resurrected the season and actually showed that he was worth something, then people kind of bought into that.
Yep, that makes sense, and certainly is consistent with human psychology. The last thing I'll say is, number one, I think Texas is the best team in the country right now, and number two, I think in this conversation you've raised a really interesting and original point. Why shouldn't we have a different playoff structure every year based on our assessment of who we think the best teams are that should compete for the national title? I think when you talk about sustainability, sometimes inconsistency in application is the best way to sustain something that's credible. But great conversation as always, Mark. Thank you for taking my call, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you being here.
Likewise.
So what Adam's proposing, of course, is that we would get to the conclusion of the season. Let's say we're sitting here having a discussion the first Saturday of December, right after all the conference championship games, and however that plays out with the conference champions and with the other top teams in the nation, and then whoever would be so blessed and given the responsibility, and I would certainly have fun with it, to say, okay, it is up to you now to determine how many teams should be in a playoff system this year. Should it be 2? Should it be 4? Should it be 6? Should it be 8, 12, 14, 16, 32, whatever, in terms of recognizing the teams that have earned the right to play for a championship, and that every season would be played out differently. And then we would work all night analyzing the sport, analyzing the results, and then trying to work that into a playoff format to announce, let's say on Sunday, to say, okay, here it is. This year it's 16 teams, and this is the way it's going to play out. This is the way we've seeded them, and this is our justification, and here it is. Well, that would blow people's minds. People don't like change. People think, and generally the first response when anything is changed is people just say, well, we always did it this way. Well, that doesn't mean that's a good way. So I'm not saying that I am sold on Adam's or what Adam proposed that turned into my idea. It's a little bit of both. So between what Adam and I put together there, I'm not necessarily saying that that's the way it should be, because there is a part of me that says, well, no, the playoff system should be uniform, and a team and a coaching staff should know when the season starts what they have to accomplish to make the playoff. And that's one of the biggest issues I had with the 14 playoff. And obviously, all the iterations of playoffs and BCS championship games and polls before that is that you could not have a definitive answer. This is the first time we are living in historic times in college football here in 2024, that this is the first time in history that we can tell every team in the country, this is what you have to do to guarantee a playoff berth. And that would be, if you play in power conference play, win your conference. You win your conference, you're in the playoff. This is the first time we could ever tell a team that. We've never had that clear a path before. And I know that I've had this argument with people in the past that have said, well, sure, we have. In the past, if you went undefeated, you were going to be in the playoff. Well, of course, the Florida State situation belied that. But even before that transpired, no, we had 5 conferences. We had 4 spots. If all 5 conference champions would in any season all go undefeated, one of them would have been left out. There was nothing that any team could do to guarantee that they would be in the playoff. And that's not a good system. College football, and I will tell all of you that I've got a project coming out, and hopefully it's going to be released here in the next month or so, that I hope intrigues a lot of you about this very subject to a certain extent. And so we'll be announcing that as soon as possible when it's ready to be released. And so, yeah, I love the conversation in regards to the playoff, what it should be, and certainly trying to correct the errors of the past. All right, we've got a few more calls here. We've got John on the line. John, what's going on tonight?
Not much, watching this Oregon game. How you doing?
Yeah, what do we got? 34 all.
Yeah, Oregon returned the kickoff for a touchdown, but it looked like the guy dropped the ball before the goal line. But they recovered.
Can't wait to see that.
Yeah, Oregon player ended up recovering it in the end zone. I had it muted,
okay.
so I didn't hear what the call was.
They did that about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I don't get why returners do it. Just hold the ball till you're about 3 feet in the end zone. But I had 3 subjects originally, but the playoff got brought up. I wanted your opinion on the top 4 seeds. I know all the first round games will be played at the higher seeds home field. Do you think that they probably could have gone away with those second round bowl games and at least gave those top 4 seeds at least one home game? Like, I understand the top 4 seeds, the benefit is you get the bye week, but I think you should still at least get a little bit of a advantage playing at home against, a team that's already got a little bit of momentum going by winning their first round game.
Yeah. So you would like the 1 through 4 seeds to host the second round games?
Yes.
And so then you would have, let's say, theoretically 1 versus 8, 2, 7, 3, 6, and 4, 5. Okay. And let's see, those would be the only games played in round 2, correct? Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Because 5 plays 12. Okay. So there's only 4. Is that right? Let's see. In the first round, we've got 8 teams playing, so we've got 4 games, and then we've got 4 more games in the quarterfinals. Okay. Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea, and I get your point that let's say you are the second best team in the Big Ten or the SEC, and you are the 5 seed, and you play a group of 5 team at home as a 5-12 game, and you destroy them, and you're able to play your backups in the second half because you win 45-10. that may actually serve as an advantage of first you get a home game. And so from a fan standpoint, it's an advantage. But even for the team, they're able to stay sharp. They didn't get totally worn out or beat up from that game. And they were able to stay sharp and play roughly a week before. Yeah, I get your point. I think it all comes down to money, and it comes down to fulfilling bowl obligations and playing in NFL stadiums and all that business.
Yeah, and I'm also interested in seeing how they're going to, because I know when you get to the semifinals, the higher seed picks where you're going. But when it comes to the quarterfinals, I'm interested to see where they're going to, like, how they're going to place these teams. You know, like, say the quarterfinal games, the Peach Bowl, which is that normally, that's normally in Georgia, right?
Yes.
So say Georgia's the 3 seed, Ohio State's the 1 seed, you know, would Ohio State be able to be like, hey, no, we want to play in the Peach Bowl, send Georgia out to Arizona? You know, I wonder if they're going to allow that to kind of happen. I know they're allowing that in the semifinals, but I wonder like how they're going to place these teams in the quarterfinals. And one more thing about the playoff is, do you think that if we're giving the top 4 seeds to the conference winners, I understand the group of 5 school is, you know, they're obviously not as big as the Power 5 schools, but why not just give the best group of 5 school a 5 seed, and let them play a home game?
Because in the eyes of most, they haven't earned it because they've not played a schedule that's anything close to what a team in the Power 4 have played.
Well, let me bring this up to you then. What about like if, like, look at tonight, if Boise State ends up pulling this win off, then you know what I mean? Like, you could probably say that they've kind of earned it there. But
just because of one game?
No, I don't know what the rest of their schedule looks like. I'm just saying as an example, like if they knock out.
Point, but Boise State or anybody else in the group of 5, even if they pull off this kind of an upset in non-conference play, number one, that doesn't bode well for Oregon. So most likely they beat a non-playoff team. And then number two, just because they pulled off one game doesn't mean that they made their way through a tough schedule.
Is there any talks about Boise going to a Power 5 conference?
Yeah, it gets brought up.
Okay.
I would think that most likely they would go to the Big 12, but they don't seem to ever be a candidate that anyone talks about because even though they've got an excellent football program, they don't have a well-respected school compared to the schools that we're talking about. The rest of their athletic program doesn't bring much to the table in terms of viewership. Now, this is something interesting about viewership because when
aren't they talking to UConn?
Pardon me?
Aren't they talking about Connecticut about joining?
Well, that's kind of cooled off because of so much going on right now. But yes, that's been the school that the Big 12 has been talking about and talking to most of all. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember if it was I think it was Urban Meyer that brought it up. Why do you think it's so hard for Notre Dame to, if they're this, obviously they're this historic school, they have a lot of prestige. Why do you think it's so hard for them to get a great quarterback recruit to go there? Do you think it's the NIL? Do you think it's the bigger, like the Alabamas, LSUs, Ohio State? They're just bigger schools, more draft history. You know, what do you think it is that's stopping Notre Dame from recruiting these great quarterbacks like these other schools are? Because they have Sam Hartman last year, they have Riley Leonard this year.
Well, I don't know how much they haven't recruited them versus how much they haven't developed them. So, as the Rod Favre is stating in the chat here, CJ Carr is a 5-star prospect that they've got right now. And let's see, even though Deshaun Kaiser didn't prove to be a great college quarterback, he was like a 3rd-round draft pick in the NFL draft.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that. I'm a Browns fan.
Oh, okay.
No.
There you go. Yeah, he didn't do much for the Browns.
Yeah.
And of course, Jimmy Clausen was a highly sought after quarterback.
Right. I was going to bring up Clausen and Brady and and Kaiser, but it's like, how long has it been since, it seems like they're okay with dipping into that transfer portal, and it just doesn't seem to be working for them very well. Like today, if they had I understand Riley Leonard was pretty good at Duke, but I mean, I don't know about, I don't want to say they played lesser opponents because they played in the ACC, but he cost them that game today. No doubt about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That pick down the middle of the field was there was no call for it.
Yeah, he's not an elite quarterback for sure. So that's what's interesting about this transfer portal and NIL is that at a place like Notre Dame, they would be replacing whatever quarterback they had. Let's go back just a few years to, the quarterback who led them to the playoffs in 2018 and 2020. I can't think of his name. Why is his name escaping me? Ian Book.
Yeah.
That kind of average quarterback, but they would replace him with their next stud and they would develop him. And look at places like Ohio State. CJ Stroud had never started a game. Justin Fields had never started a game, but they got him ready to play and they played. Dwayne Haskins, JT Barrett never started college football games, and you didn't have a transfer portal. So, but it seems like they're starting to get into a trend where they're not trusting their development and the next guy that they recruited. And even though he's a high level prospect and they're saying, well, we need to go somewhere else and get somebody who's got experience. And if they get into that cycle, they're really going to have difficulty signing a top flight freshman quarterback.
How much would you put that lack of development? I know Marcus Freeman's only been there for a couple of years, but how much would you put that on him?
Well, I'm going to put next to nothing on him right now, just because he basically stepped in and they had the one season with Tyler Buckner and
he went to Alabama.
Pine, and so that's what he inherited. And then since then, they went out and got a transfer quarterback for the last 2 years. Before that, it was Brian Kelly, obviously, where they had marginal quarterback play and never really had anybody that turned out to be an elite quarterback during his entire tenure. So that was a combination of whether you want to blame it on Brian Kelly's recruiting or you want to blame it on lack of development. I would say it was a combination.
Okay. Yeah, I think he's a good coach. I wouldn't put him up there in the top tier of coaches like a lot of people on ESPN are doing.
Brian Kelly or Marcus Freeman?
Freeman.
Okay. I wouldn't either. I think he's a superstar in the making if he continues to learn and grow. But and he has that aura, that presence. He sounds like he's a great leader of young men. And I know that the players were ecstatic when he was named the head coach. But we're at let's see, he is 20-8 in 2+ seasons. And he's already lost to a horrible Stanford team, Marshall and Northern Illinois. That's way too many bad losses for 2 years and 2 games.
Well, just put it this way. How many years has Day been with the Buckeyes now?
2019, 6 seasons.
And he's got 8 losses in the Big Ten in 6 seasons. And Marcus Freeman has 8 and 2.5.
Yeah, Marcus Freeman would have to go 38-0 to have Ryan Day's record.
Yeah. So, but I like Marcus Freeman. I
do too.
I wanted to bring up Nebraska because I seen Kirk Herbstreit sit on game day this morning. Well, Dylan Raiola, didn't he was he one point committed to Ohio State and then backed out or no?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Okay. Do you agree with Kirk Herbstreit that Nebraska will be 7-0 going into the Ohio State game?
Oh, they definitely could be.
I haven't gotten to look at the schedule. Do they avoid Penn State and Michigan this year? Or is that afterward?
They don't play either one of them. They do play Oregon, they play USC, they play Ohio State. So their schedule is very backloaded.
Okay. So they got Ohio State and then USC and Oregon?
Yes.
Okay.
and Iowa.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. That Iowa State game was. I didn't get to watch a lot of it, but I was definitely keeping track on it because I don't know what it is about that. I guess what's it called? Battle for. I just call it the Battle for Iowa, whatever. But those games always seem to be pretty entertaining every year.
Oh yeah, they are.
Who was that? I was rooting for Iowa, of course, because they're a Big Ten school. Like I have a couple buddies that were ecstatic on Facebook today because Michigan got destroyed, and I don't understand it. I hate Michigan, but when it comes to, especially now that Texas is in the SEC, when it comes to SEC Big Ten, I don't see how you're cheering for an SEC school in a regular season game because this loss hurts Ohio State if anything, in my opinion. So I always want Michigan to be undefeated when they come when it comes to playing us because it makes us look better.
Well, I
But
get your point. It makes Ohio State look better, but the nuts and bolts of the committee and the playoff rankings is that Ohio State has nothing to worry about. If they take care of business, it doesn't matter if everyone implodes in the Big Ten. They're going to be in the playoff. They're going to be the Big Ten champ. They're going to be the 1 or 2 seed.
yeah, I mean, I picked Texas to win the game, but I wish it was a better game. I wish Michigan had a better showing. I really didn't realize that Texas's defense was going to show up. I know Michigan's offense isn't that great right now, but I didn't think Texas's defense was going to show up the way they did today. And I wish Michigan would, like my buddy's a Michigan fan. He just wants them to decide on who they're going to play at starting quarterback.
Yeah, well, they obviously don't trust. If they were truly having a quarterback issue, they would bring in Alex Orji and let him throw a football. But if they
Yeah,
have yet to let him throw the ball, so it's pretty obvious that they're just not. They don't trust him to throw the ball. So I don't know that. What I can't see them going from Davis Warren's the starting quarterback. That's who we decided on, and we bring in Alex Orji just to run the ball. It's not like we bring him in to see what he has. Like sometimes you see a quarterback competition where they name somebody a starter, but the other guy they bring him in for a few series a game to see what he has, but they actually run the offense. And no, he's just a gadget player that runs the ball. I can't imagine that they're just out of nowhere going to say, no, we decided on Alex Orji, and then they're going to have him throw the ball 25, 30 times a game.
yeah. My buddy compares that. Like I said, he's a Michigan fan. He compares Alex Orji to Denard Robinson, and he just thinks it would add a different. He thinks having Orji as the quarterback would help Donovan Edwards as a running back. Because and I was like, well, of course, anytime you have a dual threat quarterback, but at some point you got to show that you can throw the ball as well.
Well, it was almost painful to watch Denard Robinson try to throw a football. However, he at least could do it. He at least, I don't know. It was painful to watch Terrell Pryor, but he proved to me after a few games that he actually, even though it looks odd, he's got a strong arm. Now, Denard Robinson couldn't throw the ball as well as Terrell Pryor. He was
No.
not the quarterback Terrell Pryor was. But if you look at his numbers here, I don't think, based on what we've seen or what we failed to see because Michigan refuses to let him throw the ball, that Alex Orji could put up any kind of numbers, anything close to that. Throw for 62% with 18 touchdowns and 11 picks, 2,500 yards in a season for a pretty lousy Michigan team. Yeah, I'm not going to put Alex Orji in Denard Robinson's league just because that's even looking at Denard Robinson's weakness. Denard Robinson was a special athlete with ridiculous running skills. Alex Orji is just like a poor man's version of Cam Newton as a runner. He's just a big dude that's got speed. But man, look at these seasons by Denard Robinson: 1,700 yards rushing, 14 touchdowns, 1,100 yards, 16 touchdowns. He was just
I didn't even realize he had a season like that rushing wise.
Yeah, 1702.
I knew he had a lot, but I didn't realize it was 1,700 yards.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, that's Yeah, I don't know if he's just talking about how he's a dual threat, but hopefully that's what he's talking about, being a Michigan fan. But I wanted to bring up Ohio State real quick because I mean I'm a Buckeyes fan. You're a Buckeyes fan. Do you have any concerns? Like, I understand we were beating up on them, but do you ever just sit there like watching the game today and be like, all right, we're in halftime, we got 35 points already? You ever have any concerns about how we always come out really flat in the second half?
Well, I got to say, I didn't see one play of that game.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I was
Yeah,
watching everybody else play. Do
yeah,
I have
watched almost every
concerns?
play. Yeah,
What's
we were
that?
up 35-0. I watched every play of the game today.
Well,
Of the
I would if I wasn't doing this, but
right.
yeah, I just watch the other games that are more important. But I'll probably watch some of it this week. Uh, do I have concerns that they should be continuing to work on their reps and their play?
Yeah, well, it just seems like I said, we didn't look the greatest last week against Akron. I know
Sure.
we won by a good bit, but we didn't look the greatest. We put up more yards in the first half of this game tonight than we put in the whole game last week. We had over
Well,
400 offensive yards in the first half.
so that's a good thing
Right.
because they played a better team this week.
But then we come out and like I said, we scored 35 in the first half, and then we actually scored more points after taking our starters out in the second half
Yeah.
than we did when you had our starters in the second half. So I don't know if the play call got really conservative. And can Chip Kelly please stop trying to run these pick plays on 3rd and 1s and 4th and 2s? Like, please. Like they said, last week during the broadcast, they were talking about how they don't like that pick play, and like I've seen them run it 4 or 5 times, and we haven't converted one time on on them pick plays. Like it's fourth. Like tonight we had a 4th and 3, and he ran a 1 yard. The tight end came in motion across the field. They snapped the ball and threw a 1 yard flat route out to him, and once again, the wide receiver Tate missed the block again, and he got hit at the line of scrimmage. Like, I like the job that Chip Kelly's doing, but when you're running the ball good like you are tonight, I think he's just trying to. I don't know if he's just like, hey, yeah, I'm smarter than you, but then at the end of the day, he's kind of like looking kind of dumb.
Well, he might be thinking, we're going to win this game 50-0 regardless. And this is a good play that these talented players should be able to execute. So I'm going to drive it through their brain that they should be able to execute this play. We're going to run it and run it and run it until they get it right.
Yeah, I didn't look at it at that point. You got a point there. I didn't look at it from that angle. And then one more thing. Do you think Jeremiah Smith can enter the Heisman conversation? Or do you think Will Howard would have the better
He
chance?
scored. I saw the one play that he had for a touchdown where he ran about 75 yards. So what kind of numbers did he have today?
I think it was 6 for 119 and a touchdown, 120 and a touchdown.
If he has a big game against Oregon, if he has a big game against Iowa, among serious Heisman voters that really understand, even if Ohio State blows out Iowa, if they understand how good Iowa's defense is, then people are going to start to take notice there. Then obviously he's really going to be on display against Oregon. So if he puts up a 7 or 8 catch game against Oregon for $120 or $150, doesn't hurt if you catch the game-winning touchdown pass. Or I've always had this theory about Heisman Trophy winners, that it comes down to 3 things. Number 1, winning. Number 2, statistics. Number 3, making plays that people remember.
Yeah, the Heisman moment.
Jaw-dropping plays if you're a receiver, if you're a quarterback making that kind of throw, or like having a drive in the final 2 minutes to win a big game. That kind of stuff.
Okay. And what do you I've only seen 2 design quarterback runs for Will Howard, do you think that's by plan, like trying to protect him, or do you think they'll start using that a little more? Because they used one today. He only had one design run today and scored a touchdown. Do you think they'll incorporate that more, or is it just they just want to keep protecting him? Because the offensive line looked great today. I just wanted to point that out.
I would guess that they're running those in practice, and so they are wanting to stay, sharp running that in practice, but keeping him out of harm's way. And then once they start to play a game that's competitive, that if they go into Oregon in 4 or 5 weeks and they blow their doors off and they don't need Will Howard to run because they're winning 21-3 in the first quarter, then they're going to keep that in their back pocket. But once they get to a place where, okay, this is another weapon we've got to go to because they're keying on Henderson and Judkins and our pass game isn't doing that much, and they've got to go to that, then I think they will. But I don't think they will until they have to.
And Judkins actually had a 75-yard touchdown run called back by a holding call today. So you haven't seen any highlights? You haven't seen the targeting call on Denzel Burke?
No, I saw one play.
Okay. Yeah, there was a targeting call that Denzel Burke got ejected out of the first quarter. That was kind of questionable. I just think that the targeting call has been out for years and they still can't really, tell a clear-cut target from not a target. And it's kind of frustrating. Even the commentator said something about it tonight, during the broadcast, how like Dean Blandino came on and said this was not targeting. The running back initiated the contact and the official reviewed it, came out, called it targeting. And it's something that I think the NCAA really needs to start getting on these officials and making sure these officials know what a targeting is and what's not. And it's just frustrating because say that happens in the second half, the week before the Oregon game, or like, any big game, the week before any big game, I'm not just saying Ohio State, but that impacts a game a lot. And these officials, I just think they just need to do a better job at telling what is a targeting. When you got the head of officiating, well, he used to be, I forget what Dean Blandino's title is, but when you got him on national television saying this is not targeting, you got these officials saying it is targeting, there's some disconnect there somewhere.
Here's my thought on it. When it comes to the officials on the field, I don't blame them for anything because they're watching these guys run at supersonic speeds in a split second and making decisions. That's why we've got replay. Now, once it goes to replay, that's where we have all the inconsistency.
Yeah. It wasn't called on the field. It wasn't called on the field. They were getting ready to snap the ball, and then someone called in up top and told them to look at it, and then they called it the targeting.
Yep. So that's the issue that I have. I don't blame the officials on the field for any targeting calls. If anything, it's almost like when there's a possible fumble, that the best course of action is just to let the play out, because if they stop the play and then it should have been a fumble and a recovery, then they're screwed. The same thing with targeting. If they see something they think could be targeting, go ahead and call it. And then the officials in the booth get to see it 85 times from 14 different angles, and they should be able to make the correct call.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I said that's what my point was. Like, I'm not talking about like when it happens live action. I'm talking about when they go under and they look at the review. Sure. That's my issue is you're watching it in slow motion. You can see frame by frame. And you're still getting that wrong.
So my basic issue with it beyond that is the penalty itself. Why we are kicking players out of games for playing football, I don't get that. If a player illegally blocks somebody, so the decision, the split-second decision to target isn't any different to me than the split-second decision of, engaging in a cut block or a knees block when the defender's engaged. Well, you made a decision that you could possibly injure somebody. Why don't you get thrown out for that too? Why are
Yeah.
we throwing players out of games? That's stupid.
Yeah.
So
Well, why they even? Because before, when it first came out, there was two types of targeting, right? The one was just a 15-yard penalty, and then if there was egregious, then they'd kick him out. Wasn't there?
I thought they've always kicked him out. I don't remember that.
But yeah, I agree. I don't think maybe
I would not
if
kick out any players. I
Well-
just think that's completely ridiculous. Number one, it's ridiculous to kick out players for just playing football. If you're going to kick out a player, kick them out for fighting, kick them out for, which of course they do at times, but kick them out for hitting some player out of bounds, because that's actually a malicious attempt that's outside the rules.
Yeah.
But they're do they really think that they are deterring targeting because because a player in the split second reaction to a ball carrier coming at them is thinking, oh, I better not target here.
Right.
I just think it's ridiculous. And then on top of that, it's the most inconsistent rule in regards to the stated rules book enforcement of it, meaning every other penalty has an exact consistent ramification, meaning it's 5 yards, it's 10 yards, it's 15 yards. Well, if you commit a targeting penalty and it's the first play of the game, well, you got to miss that half and then the other half. So you've missed the game. You've missed the entire game. Well, that's enforced the same way that if you commit targeting the last play of the first half, you just miss the second half. And then you are back the next game. So it should be a certain number of plays. Make the guy sit out for 10 plays, or make him sit out for a series, or whatever. Make the penalty consistent to every targeting violation.
Yeah. And why the thing I never understood is, why is it okay still? I know they kind of incorporated it in the NFL where if a running back leads with his head down into like a player, they kind of did away with that call now. But it's okay for the running back, the ball carrier, to lower its head into a defender's head.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Like, so the defender's not going to somehow get a concussion or get hurt by the running back running full force at him.
That's
You
just
get what
like,
I'm saying here?
oh, absolutely. It's just like forever they've allowed. Now, I have seen this called in recent years, more so than it used to ever be, is when ball carriers would stiff arm defenders and they would face mask them. They would shove their hand right in their face mask, and they didn't get called for face mask.
Right. Yeah. Now they're calling it if the ball carrier grabs their mask and pulls or something like that. But yeah, I just think the targeting call. I think if the ball carrier is allowed to lower their helmet into the side of a defender's helmet, like 230-pound running back lowering his helmet into a 180-pound cornerback, what are these rules? The people that are making the rules thinking like, oh, well, that's not going to hurt the cornerback, but a 180-pound cornerback hitting a 230-pound running back, oh, that's going to hurt the running back. So I think targeting could be called by the rule, should be called on the offense. I don't like the targeting call unless you're absolutely launching into the air with your helmet down like you're Sean William Scott and Dukes of Hazzard. It shouldn't be an ejection either way. I'm with you on that. And you're ejecting kids out of college games who, before the whole NIL, not everyone's getting paid millions of dollars to play in college football. Some of these kids are actually out there because they love playing the game. Not saying that the ones who are getting paid aren't doing it either, but there's kids out there trying to make it into the pros, and you're ejecting these kids out of these games for just being a football player.
Yeah.
and that's the one thing I don't really. That's why I like college football more than the NFL, because the NFL has gotten really soft. Everything is, we got to cater to what the offense needs. You know, you can't hit the quarterback this certain way. Now there's the hip drop tackle, and I think the NCAA has done a decent job of not trying to cater to certain players and rule like the NFL has. So, but that's all I had for you, Mark. I appreciate you taking my call. Sorry it took so long.
No problem. Thanks,
So,
John.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
You too.
All right, let's keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. We've got Defiant on the line checking in. Defiant, what's going on?
Nothing much, Mark. How are you?
I am doing just fine. What's on your mind?
I want to talk about Oregon a little bit. I
Okay.
had them win the Big Ten, and I know they struggled again today with Boise State. And I was really surprised that they kind of been struggling these first two games. I get a little bit last week because, first game of the season, but you're playing an Idaho team that, yes, is one of the best schools in the FCS, but winning by 10 points against them and winning by 3 today against Boise State, not really showing me that you're a top 10 team in any way right now.
Well, they're not a top 10 team right now. They shouldn't be. They will be in the rankings because the rankings are not logical, but they won't be in my rankings.
I just don't.
So
really
it's not a good indication of how good they are. It's not a good indicator for down the road. But again, we can't make a judgment completely on these teams because we've seen this in the past where a team has indicated that they're not as good as we thought they were, and sure enough, they weren't. They went 8-4. But then we've got other examples of teams that have bounced back from rough starts and narrow wins to become dominant teams.
And I'm not saying, that's what happened to Oregon. They're going to go 8-4, 9-3. But you just expect Oregon to at least, beat Idaho kind of handily last week. Again, you're playing an FCS team. You're a Power 4 team of Oregon's caliber.
Yes, that's what was expected.
And then they struggled, which I thought was really funny. Again, no shout out to Idaho. I know they're a pretty good FCS team, so you were playing a power school in the FCS. But even especially this week too, they were trailing against Boise State by 6 at half. And again, I know Boise State, better than what they were last year, finishing 8-6 last year. But still, you would expect Oregon to at least kind of beat these teams kind of a little handily here. Especially the talent that they have compared to Boise State and Idaho.
Absolutely.
And I also did want to talk about Notre Dame a little bit. I don't like Notre Dame at all. I'm just going to say it right there and then. My uncle is, and I know he was pretty mad today when they lost to Northern Illinois. But I would give Marcus Freeman more time. Again, he came into a situation where Brian Kelly left LSU that he needed time to get his guys into his system, and he needs time to get his more recruits and everything. And I don't really see what's all with him. Again, I know he's 20-9 right now with the loss today. And he's lost to some pretty bad teams during that stretch. But he also lost to some pretty good teams. So I don't really think he's the issue. I really think it's more kind of their offense because I know they kind of struggled today with some drop passes and some sacks, especially in the offensive line.
Yeah, so Riley Leonard's he's a college quarterback. He's a decent quarterback. He's got his limitations. I didn't see the game to let you know why they weren't able to dispose of Northern Illinois, who is nowhere close to expected to be a top group of 5 team by any stretch, or even a top team in the MAC, possibly. So I don't know. This is a Notre Dame team that is supposed to be extremely strong defensively. That's what they showed us against Texas A&M. That's what we expected last going into the season on all 3 levels on defense, that they would have a extremely inexperienced offensive line. I was super impressed with their offensive line in the second half against Texas A&M. That they got a quarterback who's a gamer, a guy that people like and gravitate to, meaning the other players, but he's not the second coming of Deshaun Watson, and that they've got a good running game. They've got two really good backs and some weapons at wide receiver, and probably not the tight end play that they've had in the past. So I don't think this Notre Dame team has any business messing around with Northern Illinois, but we also have to understand that they're not robots. So we get on here every week and people are either frustrated or intrigued or confused by how teams won by 50 points the week before and then show up and get blasted this week or aren't as consistent as they expect them to be. Well, they're 18, 19-year-old kids playing a sport, and there are different teams that match up differently with other teams, and there are different levels of emotion and intensity from week to week. They're not robots, and it's not a video game.
Oh, I definitely agree. And there's people out there that would disagree with that point there, Mark, because they think they're so great and so perfect and everything. But it's just like with every other sport, you have days, you have off days, you have days that nothing going right for you, like baseball, for instance. One day you can score 12 runs, and the next day you can score 1 run. It's just basically you have a bad day. But I don't think Notre Dame fans, especially me, thought this would be the game that they would really struggle with. And I think the Marshall game too, and they lost to Marshall. That's really what kind of threw me on. Like, okay, Notre Dame isn't as really dominant as I thought they were under Brian Kelly. Like, they can lose games to Group of 5 teams, not the best Group of 5 teams, but they're more vulnerable now under Marcus Freeman, in my opinion, than I would say under Brian Kelly.
Yeah, so the numbers and the results are backing up your claim. Yeah, for some reason, Marcus Freeman is starting to become a trend. So it's been 3 games now in 2+ seasons that Notre Dame has lost to an extremely inferior team. And you can always make the claim that, well, that team was better on that day. And yes, they were. They won the game. But the rest of the season shows us that those teams are not as good as Notre Dame. Marshall was not as good as Notre Dame 2 years ago. On that day, they won the game fair and square. Stanford was not as good as Notre Dame over the course of that season, not even close. Stanford was a horrible team. They went 3-9. They got blown out every other week, and Notre Dame was much better. But on that, so you should probably have 3 games like that. Shoot, the schools that I'm thinking of, Georgia, Clemson, Ohio State, etc., they don't have 3 games like that in, I don't know, in 30 years, more than that.
And I think it really stems not always to the coaching. Again, people point to their fingers at coaching because that's mainly most of the time that's the issue what's going on in some of these games. But sometimes just the players and how the situations you put them in too also factors into that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So I really think, again, Notre Dame didn't put the guys in the best situations today. And again, they didn't just make plays either. There's a couple, again, drop passes, a couple sacks that I really think if the offensive line would hold the blocks a little bit more, they would have been some open passes and completed passes. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about the NC State game. That was a drumming by Tennessee. And I knew Tennessee was going to be good. I didn't think they'd be that good against a NC State team because I know you told me a while ago you had NC State winning the ACC, but they lost by 41 tonight.
Yeah, well, the ACC is horrible, so I wouldn't be surprised if they still competed in the ACC. I didn't think they'd lose by 41 points. I thought they were going to lose by maybe 17. I didn't pick a score in the game, but I certainly didn't think twice about picking Tennessee to cover the spread. I thought they'd win by 17, 20 points, something like that. I was expecting, I don't know, 34-17 or something like that. So I wasn't shocked. North Carolina State, so anytime that a team plays a game like North Carolina State did in week 1 against Western Carolina, the thought is, okay, well, did they look past Western Carolina, or should that be a concern? Well, it appears as though they're really not that good, and they got blasted tonight.
And yeah, again, it was close at first. Again, I believe, I don't know who scored first. I think it was Tennessee who scored first in that game. But again, you're playing against an SEC defense, and I know they were asking Dorian about his quarterback situation and how he never really faced an SEC defense before. And I think, again, that kind of factored into that situation. Again, you don't prepare him against an SEC defense if he really hasn't played one before.
Well, he's
Now,
playing
they're talking about
against
how
teams
Grayson
that
McCall
had
has never played.
defenses as good as SEC defenses.
Yeah, and again, I believe they're talking about how Grayson McCall never played an SEC defense. Well, that kind of is that's true because again, he played in the Sun Belt. The defenses there are way different from Tennessee or even like a Vanderbilt in the SEC because the defenses are way different.
Oh, you're talking about Grayson McCall. I was talking about NC State. Like
Oh,
Dave
no,
Doran himself, his team's playing against teams.
Yeah, but no, I was watching the pregame and they asked him about Grayson McCall and how he never played an SEC defense before and was he prepared for it or not? And I believe Dorian said he kind of was. Again, I don't remember that from a couple hours ago.
Well, I'm going to assume that that's what he said. Dave Doran's not going to get on national TV before a big game against Tennessee and say, yeah, Grayson McCall has never faced an SEC defense, and I expect him to completely implode tonight because he's not prepared for it.
Oh, no. Well, I'm just saying I would remember what he exactly said, but I remember him talking about he was prepared. And then the first drive he kind of did. Again, it's just, what are you going to do? You play an SEC defense, you either have to be prepared for it or kind of not. And I mean, if they make the playoff, if they win the ACC and make the playoff, they're highly likely chance of them playing again an SEC team. So I really will be curious in how he looks at this game, past this game, and kind of uses it in preparation if he plays an SEC team in the playoff.
Yeah, the way teams are looking in the ACC right now, Miami, if this trend continues, Miami is the only team that looks like they could be competitive on the national scale. And that's just based on one data point against a bad Florida team, a relatively speaking bad Florida team. The rest of the teams look very mediocre. We could have just a free-for-all in the ACC.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Again, I would like to see Miami play at least a middle of the pack, at least decent SEC team and see how they would compare. But again, they did play a bad Florida team. But again, you're playing SEC defense at the end of the day, no matter what, how good a team is in the SEC. You're playing probably a pretty caliber defense, at least.
All right, Defiant. Anything else?
No, Mark, that's it.
I appreciate the call. Have a good night.
You too.
Uncle Rico made this comment during somebody who was calling concerning the Ohio State game today, saying this is the most complete and dominant I've seen Ohio State in forever. 680 yards on total offense, gave up 99 and 6 first downs. This call is me very confused. Yeah, so Ohio State appeared to be dominant. I think the comment was made that they had 35 points at half, and then they brought in the backups, and the backups actually outperformed the starters in the second half or something like that. So there we go. All right. Yes, Ohio State, again, they were only playing Western Michigan, but consider Western Michigan had a 1-point lead at Camp Randall Stadium midway through the fourth quarter the week before. So Ohio State, Georgia, who else? To this point, Missouri, Tennessee. Anybody else? Washington have crushed their first two opponents, regardless of how good they are or bad they are. Now, Tennessee's got the most impressive win, and Georgia over Clemson out of those collection of teams that I just mentioned. Some of them have played no one, like Washington, like Ohio State. But Georgia played Clemson, of course, and Tennessee's played NC State, and they've blown them away. But if you look at the teams that have played two games, won the two games, and actually beat a good team or looked dominant in both games, even playing bad teams, that list is extremely short. That list is pretty much okay. If you're talking about the criteria being that you won 2 games, you played one decent team, and regardless of how bad you beat that team, when you played a bad team, you blew them out. I guess that list is Georgia, USC, Tennessee. Georgia, Tennessee, USC. That's the list. That's it. That's all I can come up with. Everybody else has either not played a good team yet or they have struggled against a mediocre team. Okay. Appreciate you all being here at the Voice of College Football. We will come your way. Yes, it is 2:07 Eastern. I'm going to see you in 9 hours. So be here for the morning call-in show. It's going to be every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So check in with us here in 9 hours, and we will see you then right here at the Voice of College Football. And once again, Kyle Pickett, thank you so much for sponsoring the show tonight. Thank you for that. We appreciate it, but we are certainly saddened by the loss of that young football player in Florida. Everybody have a great night, and we will see you Sunday morning. College football is even more exciting with some action on the line. And the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Let's start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread. I've got a 40-year track record. In fact, in 2023, at $100 played per game, you would have netted over $9,300. And guess what? I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill, our ace in the hole, show stopper from Wager Talk. 6 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick, which went 21-5 against the spread the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 21-5 against the spread. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Steve Dace and Matt Zemek. Become a YouTube channel member or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2024 a winner now.